I was 27 the day my family cornered me in our old living room like I was a criminal. But to really understand how it got to that moment, the shouting, the accusations, the tears, you'd need to know a few things about me and, more importantly, about my family. My name's Ryan, and for most of my life, I've played the role of the quiet one, the chill one, the guy who doesn't stir up drama. I wasn't the golden child. That title belonged to my younger sister, Lauren, who could crash a car into a mailbox and somehow be praised for learning resilience. No, I was the one who learned to keep his head down, stay out of trouble, and never ask for too much. And for the most part, I was fine with that. Until things changed. We grew up in a decently middle-class neighborhood, the kind of place with yearly block parties and overwatered lawns. My dad, a retired firefighter, was the kind of man who held grudges like prized trophies, and my mom was the picture-perfect housewife on the outside, until you disagreed with her. And Lauren? Lauren was always the center of attention. Ever since we were kids, she had this way of pulling everyone's focus to her. Whether it was ballet recitals, honor roll certificates, which were often exaggerated, or tearful performances when she didn't get her way, she had the whole house orbiting around her. I didn't resent it at first. I was a quiet kid, more into tech than trophies, and I liked my space. But over time, it became impossible to ignore. I started noticing the little things when I turned 16. Like how Lauren got a brand new iPhone for her birthday while I was handed a hand-me-down flip phone with a cracked screen and half the buttons working. It's still good, Mom said. Or when I got into my dream college with a scholarship and no one even baked a cake. But when Lauren got accepted into a local university with an expensive tuition and zero financial aid, we threw her a backyard party with fairy lights and customized cookies. It's a big moment for your sister, Dad said. Be happy for her. I was. At least, I tried to be. But after college, I worked hard, started a remote job in IT consulting, and began saving. I didn't flaunt it. I never even brought it up. But eventually, I moved out, bought a modest apartment in a neighboring city, and slowly began building a life that wasn't about applause or validation. Meanwhile, Lauren burned through 3 internships, 2 job offers she ghosted, and 1 short-lived side hustle selling handmade candles that somehow cost my parents thousands in startup costs. Still, I visited when I could. Holidays, birthdays, the occasional Sunday dinner. I never felt completely welcome, more like a guest tolerated out of politeness. Mom would ask me questions that sounded more like criticisms. Still single? Don't you think it's time to settle down? You work online, right? That's not a real job, is it? And Lauren? She'd always be scrolling through her phone, casually dropping passive-aggressive lines like, must be nice to have no responsibilities, or wow, some of us have real stress, you know. I never took the bait. I figured it wasn't worth it. Then came the announcement. Lauren was getting married. To a guy named Jason. He seemed all right, calm, polite, worked in finance. I honestly thought maybe she'd finally settle down, maybe mellow out. My parents were thrilled. Immediately, the house turned into Wedding Central. Pinterest boards, color swatches, caterer trials. And the budget? Sky high. My parents dipped into their savings, and Lauren openly bragged about it. It's their only daughter's wedding, she'd say, laughing. They want it to be magical. I asked Dad once if he could really afford it. He waved me off. Don't worry about it. We'll manage. At the engagement party, I brought a thoughtful gift and congratulated Lauren, but she barely acknowledged me. Jason seemed to notice and gave me a half smile like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. That night, as I helped clear up empty glasses and plates, Mom pulled me aside and said, "You should think about giving something more meaningful for the wedding. Your sister's doing all the work, after all." I blinked. Like what? She shrugged. You know, a bigger contribution. Maybe a check. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't against helping, but the way she said it, like it was expected, not appreciated, rubbed me the wrong way. Still, I went home that night and thought about it. Eventually, I decided I'd offer a generous gift, maybe a few thousand, quietly. But before I could bring it up, everything started unraveling. A week later, Dad called me out of the blue. "Ryan, can you come over tonight? It's important." He sounded tense. I asked what was going on, but he just said, "It's about the wedding fund." When I arrived at the house, it was like walking into an intervention. Mom, Dad, and Lauren were all standing in the living room. The air felt thick. Jason wasn't there. I barely had time to ask what was happening before Dad's face hardened, and he pointed to the couch. Sit. I sat. Mom crossed her arms. Lauren was biting her nails, red-eyed. Dad didn't waste time. We know it was you who took the $30,000. My stomach dropped. What? The wedding account, Mom said, voice tight. It's empty. Gone, Lauren said, voice cracking. Everything. All of it. I was going to make the final payments this week, for the venue, the dress, the florist, and it's gone. Who else has access but family? I stood up. You think I stole it? Dad's voice was stern. You've always had issues with your sister getting more attention. Don't deny it. Maybe you thought this would teach us a lesson. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I laughed, a short, disbelieving sound, but no one else was laughing. They were serious. Dead serious. I looked at Lauren, expecting her to at least defend me, but she looked away, silent. Show us your bank transfers, Mom demanded. Right now. I stared at her, then at Dad, then Lauren. I had never been so insulted in my life. My jaw clenched. My heart pounded. And slowly, I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my phone, not to prove my innocence, not yet, but to check something first. I opened a folder I'd kept for months. Something I never intended to use. Screenshots. Dozens of them. See, I noticed things. Odd things. Around the time Lauren announced her wedding, I'd been helping Dad set up the shared account they created to manage the wedding funds. It was under Lauren's name, with Mom and Dad linked for contributions. And I just happened to notice that Lauren was accessing it at weird times. Large withdrawals. And she wasn't subtle about her spending either. Instagram stories of new handbags, spa visits, luxury brands, and concerts. Not to mention the Coachella tickets she posted about, but quickly deleted. I never said anything before. I figured it wasn't my business. But now they were accusing me of theft? I slowly turned the screen toward Dad. The first screenshot was a transfer, $3,200 to a high-end boutique. Then $1,500 to a luxury spa. Then $4,800 for a Coachella premium weekend package. Lauren's face went pale, and I hadn't even shown the worst one yet. But before I could slide to the next image, Jason walked in through the front door. His eyes swept the room. He took one look at Lauren's face and asked, quietly, "What's going on?" Dad started to speak, but Jason held up a hand. "No, let Ryan speak." So I did. And when I got to the last screenshot, the one with Lauren transferring funds labeled venue deposit to her personal account before using it to buy a $2,000 purse, Jason's expression didn't change. He turned to Lauren. Jason didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. There was something about the way he looked at Lauren, still, cold, like someone watching a glacier crack in slow motion, that made the silence deafening. He looked down at the last screenshot I showed him, the one where $2,000 from the shared wedding fund had been funneled straight into a payment labeled Chanel, Rodeo Drive. Then he looked up at Lauren again, slower this time. She opened her mouth, probably to spin some kind of excuse, but no words came out. Her lips quivered. Her hand trembled where it rested on the armrest. Dad was the first to speak, and even he sounded shaken. "Lauren, is this true?" Lauren shook her head, too quickly. "No, that's not what it looks like." I almost laughed. Not out of humor, but out of sheer disbelief. "Really?" I said quietly. "Because it looks exactly like what it is. You drain the wedding fund and spend it on yourself." Jason's voice finally cut through. "You told me your parents were handling everything, that you were just managing the account." "They were," she snapped, almost reflexively. I needed a few things." "Lauren." Jason's jaw flexed. "That wasn't your money. That was supposed to be for our wedding." She stood up then, too quickly, knocking over the empty wine glass on the coffee table. "I can explain. You don't understand how stressed I've been. The pressure, the expectations. I needed an outlet. I needed a designer bag and Coachella?" I said deadpan. She whirled on me. "You don't get it. You've never gotten it. Everything's always been easy for you. You sit in your little apartment with your quiet job and your perfect savings." "Perfect savings?" I repeated. "You mean the ones I earned by not mooching off Mom and Dad for 5 years?" Dad raised a hand. "Enough." But it wasn't. Not for me. Not anymore. I turned to Mom, who had been eerily silent this whole time, her eyes wide but lips pressed in a hard line. "You knew," I said quietly. Her gaze flicked toward me, then quickly away. "I didn't know," she said carefully. I thought maybe she was borrowing. Temporarily. She's been draining that account for months, I said, pulling out one last screenshot, one I had hesitated to show. It wasn't from the wedding fund. It was from another account. Dad's. A private savings account he'd created years ago and linked, out of trust, when Lauren asked for help keeping track of deposits. $8,500 gone over the course of 3 weeks. Tiny transfers. Just under the radar. Dad stared at the screen. His face turned a shade I'd never seen before, somewhere between shock and grief. That was for emergencies, he said softly. Lauren's voice was thin now, panicked. I was going to pay it back. With what? I said. The money you don't make? That's when Jason took a step back. You lied to me, he said, quieter than I expected. You said you had everything under control. I did, she said, voice cracking. I was going to fix it. You used our wedding money like your personal piggy bank. I just wanted one thing to go right, she whispered. Jason slipped the engagement ring off with slow precision and held it in his palm. For a second, I thought he was going to say something poetic, something final. But he didn't. He just looked at her one last time, then turned and walked out the front door. And that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Because in the weeks that followed, somehow, I became the villain again. At first, there was silence. A week where no one texted. No calls. Just this blank space that should have felt peaceful, but instead felt like a storm cloud holding its breath. Then came the messages. First from Mom. You really embarrassed your sister. That could have been handled privately. Then from Dad. We've lost Jason now. You could have just talked to us first. And finally, Lauren. A wall of text that started with "You've ruined my life" and ended with "I hope you're happy with yourself." I didn't respond to any of them, but I read them all, again and again, because some part of me, deep down, was still that kid who wanted his parents' approval, who wanted to be seen, heard, not just tolerated. And even though I knew I was right, even though I had the evidence, the truth, and basic human decency on my side, there was still a bitter taste in my mouth. Like I'd swallowed a jagged pill of guilt that wouldn't go down. 2 days later, Mom called. I let it ring 5 times before I picked up. Ryan, she said, voice tight, we need to talk. In person. I considered saying no. I should have. But something in me, curiosity, masochism, said yes. When I arrived, Dad wasn't home. Just Mom and Lauren, seated in the dining room like they were waiting for a funeral guest. Mom didn't waste time. Lauren's going through a hard time. You have no idea what it's like to be under this kind of pressure. I raised an eyebrow. She stole 30 grand. She borrowed. She made a mistake. She lied to everyone. I said, struggling to stay calm. And you all blamed me. Lauren sniffled, putting on that familiar wounded look. I was scared. I didn't know how to fix it. And then you humiliated me in front of Jason. I showed him the truth. I said, you humiliated yourself. There was a long pause. Mom leaned forward, her voice quiet. She wants to make things right. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Does she have 30 grand to give back? Mom hesitated. We were thinking, maybe you could help. And there it was. The moment. The breaking point. I stared at her, stunned. You want me to pay back the money she stole? It's a loan, she said quickly. You're doing well. You have savings. Your sister is in a really dark place right now. We're afraid she might. I stood up. Don't use that on me. Lauren looked up, eyes glassy. You have no idea how hard this has been. I've lost everything. No, I said. You lost the wedding. Jason's still alive. Your job prospects are still open. Your life isn't over. But you don't get to torch everything and expect everyone else to rebuild it for you. Mom stood up too. Ryan, please. If you care about this family. That's the thing, I said, suddenly calm. I don't think this family's cared about me in a long time. And I turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind me. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. But that wasn't the end. Because a few days later, I got a notification. Lauren had posted a GoFundMe. Betrayed by my own brother. Help me recover from a wedding disaster, broken heart. The caption? A tearful story about theft, emotional trauma, and being abandoned by the people I love. And in the photo? A picture of her crying on the couch, with me blurred in the background, mid-walkout. That's when I knew. She didn't want forgiveness. She wanted followers. That's when I decided, no more silence. No more letting things slide. It was time to set the record straight. But not with a comment. Not with a text. No. If she wanted an audience, I'd give her one. I didn't respond to the GoFundMe. Not publicly. Not privately. Not even when it started showing up in my group chats or when coworkers messaged me with hesitant variations of, "Hey, is this about you?" I just kept refreshing the page every few hours, watching the numbers climb like someone witnessing a train wreck in slow motion. She made over $2,000 in the first week. People ate it up. The carefully worded sob story. The blurry photo of her in tears, head cradled in her hands like she was mourning a loved one instead of the consequences of her own actions. Her caption was a masterclass in passive-aggressive guilt-baiting. Phrases like, "My brother turned on me. I was just trying to create a beautiful moment for my family. And I never expected betrayal from someone so close," painted a vivid picture of me as the cold-hearted villain. She never used my name, of course, just enough detail to let the story sell, without letting it legally backfire. Classic Lauren. And the comments? Those hurt more than I expected. Men will do anything to sabotage a woman's success. This is why I don't trust people who work in tech. No empathy. Your brother sounds jealous. Stay strong, queen. I didn't know these people. They didn't know me. But for some reason, their words stuck in my ribs like splinters. I should have let it go. Logically, I knew it was just the internet doing what it does best, picking sides based on headlines and vibes, but it still stung. Especially knowing that my own parents hadn't said a word. Not to defend me. Not to clarify. Nothing. That silence. That was the real betrayal. For a few days, I stopped working. I'd always been good at compartmentalizing, at keeping my personal life walled off from my professional world. But something about this public character assassination from my own sister, broke the dam. I found myself staring at my laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard, unable to finish a single line of code. The screen blurred. My thoughts spiraled. What if people started believing her? What if this cost me clients? What if she won? I wasn't sleeping well. I'd lie in bed, eyes burning, replaying the moment Jason walked out. The moment Mom asked me to cover up the theft. The moment I realized they'll never choose me. Not unless they have something to gain from it. That was the moment the weight hit me. Not just of what had happened recently, but of everything. The years of being overlooked. The one-sided family obligations. The way every conversation with my parents ended with a veiled comparison to Lauren, like I'd somehow failed at life just because I wasn't flashy or loud. For the first time in my adult life, I seriously considered cutting them off. No texts. No visits. Just gone. But I didn't. Not yet. Because part of me, some bruised, stubborn piece, wasn't ready to disappear. Not until I showed them who I really was. Not until I reminded them that the quiet one was never weak, just patient. So I started small. Step 1. Lock down my digital footprint. I combed through every social media account, upped my privacy settings, removed any connections that could lead to online harassment. I even reached out to a friend in cybersecurity who helped me scrub old personal data from background search sites. Lauren could throw a tantrum online if she wanted, but I wasn't going to give her more ammo. Step 2. Therapy. Yeah, I know. It sounds cliche, but I needed it. Badly. I'd always brushed off the idea, told myself I was fine, that I didn't need to talk about my childhood favoritism or the subtle emotional bruises left behind. But when you get falsely accused of theft and then turned into the villain of someone's fundraising campaign, yeah, that cracked something open. My therapist's name was Daniel. Mid-40s, straightforward, no nonsense. The first session, I didn't say much. Just laid out the bare facts. Waited for him to tell me I was overreacting or being dramatic. He didn't. He just nodded and said, "You're grieving a family that never really saw you." That sentence hit me so hard I almost walked out. But I stayed. And week by week, we unpacked everything. The way I always felt like I had to earn my place in the room. The way I stopped speaking up at home because silence was safer than mockery. The way I unconsciously picked jobs and friendships that didn't ask too much of me. Because I'd been trained to believe that attention wasn't just rare, it was conditional. It wasn't about Lauren stealing 30 grand. It was about every tiny moment leading up to that theft. And for the first time, I wasn't brushing it off. I wasn't rationalizing. I wasn't protecting them. I was healing. Step 3. Rebuilding. I threw myself back into work. Not just because I needed the distraction, but because for the first time, I saw my job as something more than a paycheck. I had control there. I had worth there. Clients listened to me. Colleagues respected me. And I realized I'd been minimizing my own success just to avoid standing out too much. Like if I admitted I was doing well, it would trigger some kind of backlash from the people who were supposed to root for me. So I stopped minimizing. I updated my website, cleaned up my portfolio, reached out to past clients for testimonials. Within weeks, I'd landed 3 new contracts, big ones. One of them was for a tech startup launching a new productivity app. They loved my clean design style and offered me double my usual rate to fast-track the project. I said yes. I bought a new desk setup, a second monitor, noise-canceling headphones. For the first time, my home office didn't feel like a makeshift corner of my life. It felt like a headquarters, a command center for someone who finally believed he deserved to take up space. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rising. And still, in the background, Lauren's GoFundMe limped along. She posted updates now and then, dramatic stuff like, "I had to cancel another venue appointment today." Still no apology from my brother. The comments thinned out. Donations slowed. People lost interest. Good, because while she was still spinning stories, I was quietly laying the groundwork for something else. I didn't know exactly what form my revenge would take, not yet. But I knew one thing for certain. It wouldn't be petty. It wouldn't be impulsive. It would be surgical. Because people like Lauren didn't fear shouting matches. They fed off drama. They twisted conflict into sympathy. But what they couldn't handle was exposure. Cold, clinical truth. Delivered at the perfect moment, with nowhere to hide. So I started collecting. Not screenshots. Not this time. Receipts. I dug into Lauren's online presence. Her Venmo history. Her business page from the candle-selling days. I tracked refund requests from angry customers who never got their orders. I even found a Reddit thread where someone accused her of scamming a Depop buyer out of a $400 handbag. All public. All time-stamped. Then I dug into the GoFundMe. Under the terms of service, fraudulent campaigns could be reported. But I wasn't ready for that yet. Not until I had everything. And while I was building that case, something strange started happening. People reached out. Old friends from high school. A former roommate of Lauren's. Even an ex-boyfriend. They all said variations of the same thing. "I saw your sister's fundraiser. Something about it didn't sit right. I always knew she was a bit manipulative, but this? Next level. You deserve better. Let me know if you need anything." It was the first time in my life that I realized I wasn't alone. I had allies. People who saw through the performance. People who believed me. And that's when I knew I'd turned a corner. Not just professionally. Not just emotionally. But in identity. I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I was the underestimated one. And that made me dangerous. Because the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting. It's the one who's been silent long enough to listen. To learn. To plan. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to be the bigger person. But I also wasn't going to become the monster they painted me as. No. I was going to be something worse. The person who exposes exactly who they are. Without ever raising his voice. The night I decided to move forward with my plan, I sat in front of my dual monitor setup with a cup of green tea and a spreadsheet titled Operation Clarity. It was ironic. I'd spent my entire life trying to avoid family drama, dodging conflict like potholes on a back road. Now I was plotting a multi-stage strategy to expose my sister's lies and, in the process, take back everything she tried to rip away from me. This wasn't about revenge out of spite. It wasn't about ruining her wedding or humiliating her in front of strangers. That part was already done by her. No, this was about truth. Pure, unfiltered, public truth. The kind that doesn't ask for apologies. The kind that turns whispers into silence. I had to be meticulous. The emotional side of me wanted to scream at her, post receipts on social media, tag her fiancé, and every donor from her GoFundMe. But the calm side, the one sharpened by therapy, pain, and patience, knew better. I wasn't interested in winning a shouting match. I wanted to end the conversation altogether. First, I sorted my evidence into 4 categories. 1. Financial misuse. Transfers from the wedding account, including the $2,000 Chanel bag, the $4,800 Coachella package, and multiple smaller luxury purchases. Each had a date, a source, and a matching screenshot of a corresponding social media post. Pictures of Lauren in the same purse, spa selfies, concert videos she tried to delete. I even pulled archived versions from an Instagram tracking site. Once on the internet, always on the internet. 2. GoFundMe violations. Her fundraiser was filled with emotional manipulation, half-truths, and outright lies. I collected every update, Every comment she replied to with claims like, "My brother stole everything," and noted timestamps where she used cropped or staged images to support her narrative. Then I compared them with my own metadata, screenshots, texts, and the full conversation from the night she was exposed. I even had Jason's silent but undeniable reaction, walking out, ring in hand, as implied proof of her guilt. 3. Past scams. I gathered testimonials from people she'd burned in the past. An ex-roommate who had to pay off a lease when Lauren moved out suddenly and ghosted the landlord. A high school friend she borrowed money from during college and never repaid. A former customer who tried to buy candles and got shipped a melted box of wax and glitter. I offered to redact their names. Most said, "No need. I want her to know it's from me." 4. Psychological warfare. The final category was more personal. I didn't need it for GoFundMe or for legal purposes, but I needed it for me. Messages from my parents. The cold texts after Jason left. The way they rallied around Lauren without once calling to ask how I was doing. The emotional gaslighting. The way Mom looked me in the eye and asked me to fix what Lauren broke. I screenshotted those, too. Not to post, but to remember. For clarity. With the folder complete, I stored it on an encrypted drive and backed it up twice. Once on a flash drive hidden in a kitchen drawer, and once in cloud storage under a decoy name. Budget Planning 2023. Now I needed allies. Not to attack, but to amplify. I reached out to Jason first. He hadn't contacted me since the night he left. I didn't blame him. His life had imploded in real time, and he had every reason to disappear. But I needed to know where he stood. So I drafted a short, respectful message. "Hey, Jason. I hope you're doing okay. I haven't said this yet, but I'm sorry you had to find out the way you did. I know you probably want nothing to do with any of this, but if you ever feel like talking, or if you want to see what I've found, I'm here." He replied 10 minutes later. "I've been waiting for you to reach out. Let's talk." We met at a local coffee shop the next morning. He looked different, thinner, a little more hollow around the eyes, but clearer, too. Like someone who'd shed a weight he didn't even realize he'd been carrying. We didn't waste time on small talk. He said, "She tried to text me last week. Said you manipulated everything. That she was set up." I smiled. Classic Lauren. I didn't respond, he said. "I know what I saw, but what I didn't know is how far it went." So I showed him. The folder. The organized receipts. The matching Instagram posts. His face remained calm as he scrolled, but at one point he leaned back and let out a long exhale. "She didn't just steal money. She played all of us." I nodded. "I'm planning to report the GoFundMe, but I want to time it right." Jason looked at me for a long second. "What if I helped?" I blinked. "You'd go on record?" "She lied to everyone I know. My friends. My family. She made me look like an idiot. If I can be useful, use me." I thanked him. We exchanged numbers. He agreed to write a formal statement if needed. And before we parted, he said, "For what it's worth, you're nothing like how she described you." I smiled. "Neither are you." With Jason on board, I moved to the next phase, leverage. I wasn't trying to destroy Lauren's life. I just wanted the truth to reach the people who needed to hear it. And if possible, let her feel what it was like to answer for something for once. But before going public, I wanted to give her a choice. One last chance to fix it quietly. So I wrote her an email. "Lauren, I know we haven't spoken since the fundraiser, and I don't expect you to respond. But I'm giving you an opportunity here. I have evidence that your GoFundMe was built on false claims. That you misused the wedding account. That you manipulated our family, your friends, and the public. You can call it a misunderstanding. You can say you panicked. That's not my business anymore. What is my business is that you're using me as a villain to collect money under false pretenses. I'm asking you to take down the fundraiser. Refund what you can. Issue a brief apology, no details necessary. Just honesty. If you do that, I walk away. No posts. No reports. No exposure. Just peace. You have 72 hours. Ryan." She responded 11 minutes later. "Nice try. You think anyone's going to believe you over me? The socially awkward loner who barely speaks at family events? You've always been jealous. This is just your sad little revenge fantasy, because you're bitter I was the favorite. I don't owe you anything. Good luck playing hero. No one's watching." That was it. The final nail. I didn't even feel angry reading it. Just confirmed. Confirmed that no matter what I did, no matter how clean or kind or measured I was, she'd always paint me as the villain. Because to her, the truth was a threat. So I opened GoFundMe's fraud reporting portal, attached all my files, the receipts, the contradictions, the staged photos, Jason's written statement. I submitted the report at 3:14 p.m. on a Thursday. By Friday morning, the page was gone. Just 404 not found. No announcement. No post from Lauren. Nothing. She vanished from social media for 3 days. When she came back, her Instagram was locked. Comments disabled. Her follower count dropped by over 2,000. I didn't post anything. I didn't gloat. I just watched. Then came the call from mom. Blocked number. Straight to voicemail. I don't know what you did, but your sister's devastated. The page is gone. People are asking questions, and she's saying she might lose her job over this. You've made your point. Call me back so we can talk about fixing this. I didn't call back. I sat on my balcony, coffee in hand, and thought about how long I'd waited to be seen, to be understood, to be believed. And now that I didn't want their apologies. I wanted my peace. But I wasn't done yet. Because what Lauren didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the final phase hadn't even started yet. She lied to donors, to friends, to her fiancé. But the worst? She lied to people at work. People who thought they were donating to a woman abandoned by her evil brother. People who sent her money out of kindness. I had emails, screenshots, a tip already written, and one click away from sending it straight to her company's HR. But I paused, because maybe, just maybe, there was one more card to play. One final moment to look her in the eye and give her the same choice she refused to give me. Let her see the blade descending before it falls. Let her feel it. I gave her one more chance. Not out of mercy. By now, mercy was long off the table, but because I wanted her to feel the weight of knowing. The slow, creeping realization that everything she'd built out of lies was crumbling, and that I wasn't the same passive brother she could manipulate with a few tears and a guilt trip. I texted her from a new number. No greeting. No threats. Just a photo. It was her company's Employee Code of Conduct policy, with a red circle around the section that read, "Any misuse of public fundraising campaigns for personal gain that may damage the company's reputation will be subject to disciplinary action up to and including termination." Underneath, I wrote, "HR doesn't know yet, but they will if I don't see a real apology. Public. Honest. No spin." I waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then my phone buzzed. "You're bluffing." Then another. "You wouldn't do that to your own sister." And finally, "You're pathetic. You've always been jealous of me, and you still are." 3 messages, same pattern, deflection, manipulation, rage. She never learned. So I sent the email. I made it short and professional. I attached the relevant screenshots, her fundraiser, the false claims, the way she named her company as supportive in her updates to gain trust from donors. I explained that I was reporting as someone misrepresented in her public campaign and requested anonymity as a third party. I didn't ask for punishment. I didn't even suggest consequences. I just told the truth. By Monday morning, she was fired. Jason told me. Apparently, she called him in hysterics, sobbing, saying I had ruined her career and taken everything from her. But I hadn't. She had. I simply turned the lights on. The fallout spread fast. Her little GoFundMe stunt had been seen by more people than I realized. Co-workers, friends, even mutuals from college. The gossip moved through group chats and private messages like wildfire. Her Instagram account went dark again, and someone screenshotted a post from her Finsta where she wrote, "I'm being harassed and stalked by my brother. If anything happens to me, it's his fault." That was the moment I knew she'd try to flip the narrative. So I did something preemptive. I posted a single thread on Reddit. An anonymous one. No names. No identifying details. Just a factual, emotionally honest account of everything. The wedding fund, the accusations, the fundraiser, the evidence, the silence from my parents. I uploaded it in our / entitled Parents, under the title. My sister accused me of stealing her wedding money. Then I found out she used it for Coachella. It went viral within 24 hours. People shared it, screened it, commented on it by the thousands. And in the thread, I never once insulted her. I didn't need to. The story spoke for itself. And that's when something wild happened. Someone from her former job, someone who had donated to her GoFundMe, saw the post and commented, confirming they'd received a company-wide email about her departure due to internal investigation. They didn't name her, but it didn't take a genius to connect the dots. Within 2 days, Lauren deactivated all her accounts. No more curated life. No more audience. Just silence. As for my parents, it took them another week to reach out. This time, Dad called me himself. His voice was rough. Not angry, tired. Maybe for the first time, genuinely tired. Your mom's been crying a lot, he said. I said nothing. She feels like we failed both of you. That stung. Not in the way he thought it would. It wasn't guilt. It was resentment, because only now, after the world saw who Lauren really was, did they start questioning the stories they'd believed for decades. I wanted to say we're sorry, he added. Are you? I asked. Silence. She stole 30 grand from you. I said. She lied to everyone. You blamed me without hesitation. You only started listening when she lost everything. That doesn't feel like parenting. That feels like damage control. More silence. Then, you're right. I let the words hang there. For once, I didn't fill the pause. I didn't try to make him comfortable. I didn't offer relief. Eventually, he spoke again. If you're willing, we'd like to talk. In person. Clear the air. I told him I'd think about it. I haven't yet. And honestly, I don't know if I will. Because in the weeks that followed, something strange happened. Peace. I wasn't used to it. At first it felt too quiet, like waiting for a storm. But it wasn't a storm. It was freedom. I slept better. I laughed more. I reconnected with old friends, went hiking for the first time in years, even booked a trip to Seattle, just because. I didn't check my phone obsessively. I didn't second-guess every text from family. I finally lived without that subtle tension buzzing beneath my skin. And Jason? He started seeing someone new. A teacher. They seemed happy. He texted me one night. Thank you for showing me the truth. I don't know how I didn't see it before. I just replied, when you're in the story, it's hard to read the ending. I never wanted revenge. Not really. I just wanted the truth to have weight. And it did. Lauren lost her job, her credibility, her curated online identity. She had to sit in the rubble she built with her own hands. And me? I didn't just get justice. I got my life back. My name. My voice. My peace. And no one, not my sister, not my parents, not 1,000 GoFundMe comments, can ever take that from me again. The quiet one finally spoke. And the silence afterward was the loudest thing they'd ever heard. My name's Alex. I'm 34, and up until last Christmas, I kept most things about my life pretty private, especially when it came to money. Not because I was struggling or ashamed or anything like that, but because I've learned that in families like mine, the less they know, the less they can use against you. I work as a freelance strategist, marketing, branding, and copywriting for startups and indie businesses mostly. It's the kind of job that makes people tilt their head and ask, so, what do you actually do? Especially people like my brother, Evan. He's 36, works in corporate finance, and if you ever forgot that detail, don't worry, he'll remind you. Loudly and repeatedly, usually in front of an audience. Growing up, Evan was the golden boy. Honor roll, varsity sports, internships hand-delivered by friends of our dad. I, on the other hand, was the creative one. That was never meant as a compliment. It was what my relatives said when I couldn't do math in my head as fast as Evan or when I decided to major in English instead of economics. At every holiday gathering, it was like walking into a courtroom where my life choices were constantly on trial. My aunt would always start with the same question. So, still doing that freelance thing? With the tone people usually reserve for discussing seasonal rashes. I got used to it. You'd think after a decade of rolling their eyes at my job title, it would lose its sting. But it doesn't. Last Christmas, though, something shifted. And it wasn't just the usual subtle digs. It turned into something else entirely. My wife, Megan, and I arrived at my parents' house around 4 p.m. on Christmas Day. We'd brought wine, gifts, dessert, the whole nine. Megan wore this deep green dress that made her look like a forest goddess, and I was actually excited to see my niece and nephew, who were now old enough to launch themselves at your legs and demand piggyback rides. My parents were in the kitchen finishing up dinner prep. My mom gave me one of her brisk, distracted hugs, already thinking about whether the ham was overcooked, and my dad barely looked up from his spreadsheet of wine pairings. I'm not kidding. He made a pairing sheet for Christmas dinner. Classic. Evan and his wife, Chelsea, were already there. Evan was on the couch with a whiskey in hand, holding court. His voice carried through the house like a foghorn. So we just closed the quarter with a 7% surplus over target, he was saying as we walked in. It's brutal out there, but we're outperforming like maniacs. 6 figures, man. And that's not even including the bonus. He said it with this laugh like he was both humble and superior at the same time. Then he looked over his shoulder and saw us. Speak of the devil. Hey, little bro. I gave him a nod. Hey, Evan. Merry Christmas. Still doing your, what do you call it, brand stuff? He asked, with the same smirk he's had since high school, the one that makes you want to shove his face into a snowbank. It's going well, I said, keeping my voice light. Megan shot me a warning glance, the one that said, don't rise to it. Not today. Evan grinned. That's cute. I don't know how you make it work without a salary, though. I'd have ulcers. I need stability. I like being able to plan my life, you know? Before I could respond, Chelsea chimed in. It's so nice that you get to work in your pajamas, though. That must be relaxing. I laughed, but it sounded more like an exhale. I wasn't surprised. They loved this routine. Every family event, it was the same script. Evan, alpha provider. Me, the quirky side character whose job was some strange hobby no one could fully understand. I could have shut it down right there. Told them about the contract I'd just signed with a European tech startup that was worth more than Evan's entire bonus. But that's not how I play things. I've always been quiet about money, not because I don't make any, but because I don't need to flash it. Unlike my brother, dinner was served around 6. My mom went full Pinterest, elegant place settings, cranberry centerpieces, the whole thing. The table was packed. Parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and the grand finale, Evan popping a bottle of champagne like he was ringing in the new year. He insisted on doing a toast before we ate. I just want to say how grateful I am this year, Evan announced, lifting his glass. For family, for health, and for job security. Not everyone can say they've got a 6-figure income in this economy. He looked right at me when he said it, subtle as a sledgehammer. There were a few awkward chuckles around the table. My aunt patted Evan's arm and said, "We're so proud of you, honey." Megan stiffened next to me, her hand tightening around her fork. I leaned over and whispered, "It's fine." But it didn't feel fine. After dinner, people moved into the living room for coffee and dessert. Megan went to the dining room table to grab her laptop. It had our niece's coloring app on it, and she needed to distract her while the adults talked. She opened the lid, and then, for some reason I'll never understand, got pulled into a conversation with my cousin about holiday plans and walked away without closing the screen. A few minutes later, Evan wandered past. He had a slice of pie in one hand and was humming something under his breath. Then he paused. I saw his brow furrow as he looked down at the laptop. His head tilted slightly. He blinked. He didn't say anything right away, just stood there for a second, weirdly quiet. Then he muttered, "Wait, what is this?" I turned my head. Megan's laptop was open to a PDF file, our tax return summary. She'd downloaded it a week earlier to check a number and apparently never closed the window. I could see the screen from where I sat. Bold font at the top. Our name. Our earnings. Evan stared at it like he was trying to make sense of a magic trick. "Is this real?" he asked, his voice lower now. Megan froze, her cheeks going pale. I got up slowly and walked over, casually reaching for the lid. Yup. Private document. Shouldn't be reading it. But he didn't let it go. "No. Hold on. This says you made." He trailed off, the number stuck in his throat. His eyes darted back and forth across the page like he was waiting for a punchline that never came. I shrugged. "I've had a good year." "Triple," he said, barely audible. I didn't respond. He looked at me like I'd just grown another head. Then, without saying another word, he turned, walked back to the couch, and sat down in total silence. He didn't speak to me the rest of the night, and he hasn't spoken to me since. But that's not even the real story. That was just the crack in the ice. The unraveling didn't start until later, when things began to shift, subtly, then dramatically. See, Evan's silence wasn't just about shock or embarrassment. It was something else, something sharper. And over the next few weeks, it turned into a slow, bitter campaign that nearly tore apart more than just our brotherhood. And that's where things really started to get interesting. After Christmas, things went quiet, unnaturally quiet. At first, I chalked it up to the usual post-holiday social fatigue. Everyone tends to retreat back into their own lives after the festivities, and I figured Evan was just licking his wounds in private, trying to wrap his head around the fact that the broke freelancer, little brother, wasn't actually broke at all. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence began to stretch. No group messages from him. No jokes in the family chat. No Instagram stories of his gym selfies or sushi dinners. Just radio static. Megan and I didn't bring it up at first. She'd caught the moment with the laptop, and we'd exchanged a knowing look afterward. But we had our own lives to return to, client meetings, new contracts, deadlines. The new year had kicked off fast for me, and I was juggling 3 international campaigns, which meant weird hours and lots of coffee. But there was a weight in the background, like a warning hum just beneath the surface. I couldn't quite name it, but I felt it. Evan had gone silent. Yes, but it didn't feel like peace. It felt like build-up. The first sign came from my mom. She called one morning while I was reviewing ad copy for a fashion brand in Milan. "Alex," she started, "I just wanted to ask, is everything okay between you and your brother?" I paused. "Why?" "Well, he's been saying some strange things. That you were flaunting your success? That you embarrassed him? That Megan did it on purpose with the laptop." I blinked. "Wait, what?" He said she left it open intentionally. I nearly laughed, but my throat felt tight. "You're kidding, right? It was a mistake. We didn't even know it was still open until he started reading it." "I know, honey. I believe you. But you know how he is when he feels shown up." No, I didn't know how he was. I knew how he acted. He made everything into a competition. He already assumed he was winning. For years, I let it slide. But this was different. This wasn't him cracking jokes at dinner or gloating about his bonus. This was him rewriting the situation in his head so he could justify the bruised ego. Then my aunt texted me a week later. "Hey, just wanted to check in. Evan told us you're doing some shady online business stuff. You know we're here if you need help finding something more stable." That one made my blood run cold. Shady. Online. Business. The words weren't innocent. I replied politely, correcting her, explaining I was registered, tax-paying, with a client list any agency would kill for. But I could already tell the damage had started. Evan wasn't just upset. He was retaliating. The family chat, where we'd once shared dumb memes and recipe links, turned into a different animal. Evan would drop articles about freelancers scamming clients or how online influencers fake income. He wouldn't tag me, but he didn't need to. The implications hung in the air like fog. Chelsea chimed in once with a screenshot of someone getting audited and wrote, "This is why we love having real jobs." Just saying. And when I finally texted Evan directly to ask him what the hell was going on, he left me on read. Still, I tried to stay above it. Let him have his tantrum. I figured eventually he'd get bored or embarrassed and move on. He didn't. The real fracture came at our dad's 65th birthday in February. A big deal for the family. There was a dinner planned, some slideshow presentation Chelsea was obsessively curating, and everyone was expected to contribute something for the family tribute video. I sent in a short clip of Megan and me saying a few kind words, tossing in a few old photos I scanned of my dad and me fixing a bike together when I was 10. I kept it light and warm. The night of the dinner, we all gathered at this fancy restaurant downtown. Megan and I showed up on time. Evan and Chelsea were late, as usual, but when they finally strolled in, Evan acted like nothing had ever happened. He slapped me on the back, gave Megan a polite nod, and said, "Glad you guys could make it." It felt eerie, like watching a lion smile. We made small talk through appetizers, but Evan kept steering the conversation toward finances. First asking if I still had that freedom to work from bed, then asking if I'd looked into getting a real business license this year. Megan sipped her wine silently. I gave him nothing, just nods, shrugs. But inside, I was boiling. Then came the slideshow. Family photos, messages, goofy clips from old camcorder tapes. Everyone laughed, clapped, teared up. Then Evan took the mic. "I just want to say how proud we all are of Dad. 65 years of hard work. Setting an example for the rest of us. Of what it means to be a man. A provider. Someone who takes care of his family. Who never cuts corners or hides behind trendy jobs or online facades." There was a beat of silence. Chelsea clapped. My mom smiled nervously. My chest tightened. Later that night, as we were leaving, I caught Evan alone outside the restaurant while he lit a cigarette. He never smoked around family. Only when he was stressed. What was that about? I asked him. He exhaled, looking at the horizon. "You tell me." I waited. He didn't speak. "You're angry that I make more than you," I said. "That's it, isn't it?" "You're a joke, Alex," he said quietly. You sit in your little home office writing tweets for startups and think that makes you a big shot. You think you can just skip the grind and win. I stared at him. It's not a competition. Of course it is, he snapped. It always has been. That was when it hit me. It wasn't just about money. It was about identity. About the role he'd carved out for himself in the family. The successful one, the stable one, the favorite son. And I'd shattered it without meaning to, just by quietly doing well in my own lane. You've been lying to everyone, he added. Acting like you're barely scraping by, then showing off like you're a king. I never showed off, I said. You read something that wasn't meant for you. And now you're punishing me for your own insecurities. He scoffed. We'll see how long it lasts. Internet fads come and go. And with that, he walked away. I didn't say anything to Megan on the drive home, but I knew that line would stay with me. 2 weeks later, my dad called me with a strange tone in his voice. Evan's helping us redo the family trust paperwork, he said. He's been suggesting we consolidate everything under one financial advisor. Streamline it. My stomach dropped. And you trust him with that? Well, he is in finance. Dad, I said slowly, just be careful. You know what I do, right? He paused. You write ads. No, I said flatly. I manage digital strategy for tech companies. I handle legal compliance, privacy regulations, brand risk, and scalable revenue architecture. I know how to read contracts. If you're going to change anything legal, I'd like to see it first. Another pause. I'll think about it, he said. But by then, I knew something had shifted. Evan wasn't just trying to win the sibling rivalry anymore. He was trying to rewrite the narrative. The golden boy had taken a blow to his pride, and instead of healing, he decided to burn everything that threatened his throne. Then, the betrayal came. It wasn't dramatic. It was a message from my cousin Lucy. Hey, just wanted to give you a heads up. Evan's been telling people you've been under investigation for tax fraud, that your income was exaggerated, said it might affect the trust stuff. I stared at the message, rereading it 4, 5, 6 times. Megan walked in and saw my face. What is it? She asked. I handed her the phone. She read it, slowly, then looked up. That's defamation. I nodded. It's more than that. Why would he say that? Just to hurt you. I felt something twist in my gut. No, I said. He wants me out of the family finances completely. He's trying to make me look like a liability. And just like that, everything I'd been brushing off suddenly crystallized into something darker. This wasn't just about pride. This was about power. But if Evan wanted a war, he'd picked the wrong opponent. I'd spent the last 10 years learning how to build narratives, manage public perception, and outthink people who underestimated me. I'd kept quiet out of respect. But now I was watching someone set fire to my name in slow motion. And I wasn't about to let that continue. Not without a plan. Not without consequences. I didn't react right away. After I read Lucy's message, I just sat there on the couch, motionless, while Megan paced the room, fuming. My thoughts weren't calm or coherent. It was more like static, a fuzzed-out radio signal filled with disbelief, rage, humiliation, and this slow, creeping sense of why does this hurt so much. I'd always known Evan could be arrogant, competitive, even cruel in that condescending way of his. But to go behind my back and accuse me of tax fraud? That wasn't just petty. That wasn't just a jab. That was calculated. He wasn't gossiping. He was poisoning my name. And the worst part? Some people were listening. Over the next couple weeks, I started noticing little shifts in how family members spoke to me. My uncle, who used to ask me about crypto and marketing trends at every gathering, suddenly stopped texting back. My dad sent a vague message about how there's no smoke without fire after I asked again about seeing the trust paperwork. Even my mom, who always tried to play peacemaker, had started answering my calls with an edge in her voice, as if she were bracing herself. It's just hard to know what's real anymore, Alex, she said during one call. Evan said you're under investigation and haven't told anyone. Why would he lie about that? I nearly dropped the phone. Because he is lying, I said. I'm not under investigation. That's insane. Did you even ask me before believing it? She sighed. You've always kept things to yourself. We never really know what's going on with you. That hit harder than I expected. Because yeah, I had kept my distance. I didn't do it out of malice, though. I just knew, deep down, that showing too much of my world would give people like Evan ammunition. I thought protecting my privacy was enough. I thought success could just be, it didn't have to be performed, paraded, or shoved in anyone's face. But I underestimated how uncomfortable quiet success makes insecure people, especially when it shifts the power dynamic they've built their identity on. And now I was watching everything crumble. Overnight, I went from the weird freelancer who somehow makes it work to the suspicious brother with fake money and legal problems. I could feel the shift in every comment, every lukewarm family reply, every silence that lasted just a little too long. Even Megan, as supportive as she was, started asking the hard questions. "Do you think your business is too dependent on staying invisible?" she asked one night over dinner. Like, maybe it's time to stop hiding how well you're doing. I didn't answer. I just stared at my plate. That was the thing. I liked the shadows. I liked being underestimated. It gave me room to operate without noise, without ego. I never wanted to be the loudest guy in the room. I just wanted to build my thing and live a peaceful life. But apparently, in this family, if you're not loud, someone else speaks for you. And if they speak loud enough, you lose the right to define your own narrative. A week after that conversation, I hit what I think was my personal low point. I was on a Zoom call with a client, big one, a US-based e-commerce brand. We'd worked together for over a year. They were prepping to launch a new product line, and I'd handled all the pre-launch strategy. Things were running smooth, until they brought up a compliance check that had flagged something odd. "Just routine," they assured me. "But we heard some chatter from one of your old college connections. Said there might be some irregularities in your business filings." My stomach turned. "Who?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. They didn't say, but I knew. Evan had gone beyond family. He was sniffing around old classmates, LinkedIn connections, maybe even trying to nudge something into public view. I don't know what exactly he was saying, or who he was feeding it to, but it was spreading, little whispers designed to make people second-guess me. I ended the call and just sat there in my office, lights off, the laptop screen still glowing. I don't think I moved for an hour. That night, I finally admitted to Megan that I felt beat. "This isn't just annoying anymore," I said. "He's actually damaging my business. He's tainting my name." She didn't say anything right away. She just took my hand and squeezed it. "Then don't let him," she said. "Fix it, but do it your way." And for the first time in weeks, something inside me clicked. She was right. Evan was playing loud, messy, and public, but he was making a mistake. He thought silence meant weakness. He thought subtlety was passivity. He thought I didn't know how to fight. He forgot that I'd built a business on psychology, influence, and strategy, that I knew how to read people, how to control narrative, how to make moves without leaving fingerprints. He'd built his castle on family reputation and LinkedIn quotes. I'd built mine on quiet, precise execution. And maybe it was time I stopped treating this like a misunderstanding. This wasn't confusion. This was a campaign. So I started rebuilding, quietly. The first thing I did was get legal. Not emotionally legal. Not revenge fantasy legal. Real legal. I contacted my business attorney, sent over a packet of everything I had, screenshots of Evan's posts, the group chat digs, Lucy's message about the tax fraud claims, even the vaguely threatening comments he'd made outside Dad's birthday dinner. We filed a formal letter of cease and desist for defamation and business interference. I didn't serve it yet, just kept it in my back pocket. Then I began what I called my reputation audit. I scheduled private calls with every major client I had, just to check in. I asked how things were going, if there were concerns, if they'd heard anything about me. Most of them hadn't, but one or two had heard whispers. From where? Who knows? LinkedIn. Industry gossip. People are nosy. But every time I explained things calmly, professionally, and without slinging mud, they responded the same way. "You're solid, Alex. We trust you." Still, I didn't stop there. I started posting a little more on social, case studies, behind-the-scenes work, client testimonials, with permission. Not bragging, just visibility. Letting people know what I do, how I do it, and why it works. I launched a minimalist website, a portfolio, a few strategy blog posts, a contact form. Nothing flashy, just presence. And I told Megan something that shocked even me. "I'm going to start speaking publicly." She blinked. "Like conferences? Podcast guest spots," I said. "Interviews. Thought leadership panels." Not as a look at me thing, as a here's what I've actually built thing. It terrified me. I hated the spotlight. But if Evan wanted to paint me as shady, then I'd drown his lies with transparency. Then came the hardest part. My family. I sat down and wrote a 10-page document. Not an essay, a breakdown of my business, my earnings, my tax filings, my contracts. All verified, all clear, all legal. I attached the draft legal letter to Evan. I sent it to my parents with a simple message. This is what I've built. If you choose to believe rumors instead of asking me, I understand. But this is the truth. Not just because I said so, but because I can prove it. Love, Alex. Then I waited. The fallout was complicated. My dad didn't reply for 3 days. When he finally did, it was a short message. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I should have asked. My mom called and cried. She apologized. She said she felt manipulated and confused. That Evan had just sounded so certain. And Evan was silent. But I knew that wouldn't last. Because when someone builds their identity on being the best in the room, they don't take exposure well. They either double down or implode. And knowing my brother, he wasn't done yet. But neither was I. I wasn't just going to clear my name. I was going to take back everything he tried to steal. And the moment would come. I could feel it building, slowly, steadily, like pressure behind a dam. And when it broke, he'd learn what it really meant to be underestimated. I didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks after I sent that document to my parents, I got a text from my cousin Ryan, Evan's former best man, gym buddy, and lifelong sidekick. Ryan and I weren't close, but we shared enough blood and family functions to know each other's tells. And this text? It read like a man who'd just realized he'd been standing on the wrong side of a fault line. Hey, just wanted you to know Evan's been melting down in the group thread with some of the guys. Went off about you hacking the family and turning everyone against him. Honestly, he's been acting weird ever since Christmas. You good? I read it twice. That message confirmed what I'd suspected for weeks. Evan was spiraling. Not because of anything I did to him, but because his story was starting to crack, and he didn't know how to survive without being the protagonist in every room. Still, I didn't reply. Not yet. Because the truth was, I was still building. Still watching. Still collecting. By now, I'd moved out of defense mode. The silence was gone. The fog had lifted. I had clarity now, and with it, something I hadn't felt in months. Control. My next step was simple. I needed to know exactly how far Evan had gone. Because if I was going to expose him, if I was going to reclaim everything he'd tried to erase, I needed receipts. So I started looking. It began with my LinkedIn account. I hadn't touched it much since 2021, but I still had notifications on. And sure enough, buried in the archives were a few oddities. A message from a recruiter I didn't know asking why I'd pivoted into drop shipping. A comment on one of my old posts questioning the legitimacy of my self-employed title. Both from users with no mutual connections. Both posted the same week Evan had ghosted the family. It didn't take a genius to figure it out. So I looped in a friend of mine, Noelle, who worked in digital risk management. She owed me a favor from a project I'd helped her land last year. I sent her a summary of the situation, minus the messy family drama. Can you run a light background trace? I asked. I want to know if someone's been creating fake traffic or accounts tied to me. Noelle came back 2 days later with a gold mine. For burner accounts. All created within the same 2-week span. All linked to the same IP subnet used by a private finance firm in the city. And one of them had visited my website 32 times over the course of a weekend. The same weekend my e-commerce client had mentioned those compliance concerns. She sent me a report, labeled and timestamped. One IP address kept popping up. I looked it up. It belonged to the building where Evan's firm was headquartered. I stared at the screen, pulse quiet. Cold. He'd created dummy accounts. Posed as random users. Dredged up doubt. Quietly, deliberately, anonymously, trying to smear me under the radar. And now I had proof. I filed everything. Saved it. Copied it. Uploaded it to 3 separate cloud drives. I wasn't going to rush anything. I wasn't going to throw it in his face. No, I was going to wait. For the perfect moment. And that moment was closer than I thought. About a week later, my mom invited Megan and me to a family dinner. Not a holiday, not a birthday, just a casual get-together, as she called it. But her tone told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't casual. This was damage control. I said yes. Megan gave me a look. You sure? I nodded. It's time. Before the dinner, I called Lucy, my cousin who'd originally tipped me off, and asked if she'd be there. Yeah, she said. Evan's been acting extra weird lately. Like he's trying to act like nothing ever happened. But he keeps bringing up his new promotion. New promotion? I asked. Yeah, she said. Apparently, he's trying to get a VP role at his firm. Final interviews are next month. Whole family's been buzzing about it. And just like that, the gears clicked. He wanted to look clean, untouchable, powerful. Of course he did. Reputation was everything in finance. And that's when the idea began to form. I wasn't going to burn him to the ground. I was going to undress him, piece by piece, at that dinner. And I wasn't going to do it with shouting or threats. I was going to do it with questions. The night of the dinner, Megan and I arrived 10 minutes early. My mom greeted us like she was trying to pretend nothing had ever happened, which, to be fair, was her specialty. My dad nodded. Polite, distant, still a little rattled. The house smelled like roasted chicken and wine sauce. There were already 8 people in the living room. Evan, Chelsea, Ryan, Lucy, and a few of our aunts and uncles. Evan was mid-story, as usual. So then I tell the junior associate, if you don't understand the amortization model, maybe this role isn't for you. And the room cracked up. Fake laughter rippled through the group. He saw me and paused, then smiled. Alex, he said, glad you could join us. Megan gave him a nod. I gave him one back. The rest of the evening played out like a slow chess game. I said little, smiled a lot, asked about people's jobs, commented on the food. Megan was warm but quiet, letting me lead. Then, after dinner, we all sat around the fire with coffee. That's when my dad, of course, asked the question that would light the fuse. So, Evan, tell us about this VP thing. Evan grinned like someone had just played his entrance music. Well, he said, it's been in the works for a while. I've been managing more accounts lately. The firm's looking to expand into advisory services, and I've been pushing that initiative for months. How does that work? I asked innocently. Evan glanced at me. What do you mean? The expansion, I said. Advisory services. What's the compliance structure for something like that? Especially when it overlaps with private wealth management. He blinked, then smirked. Why do you ask? Just curious, I said. You mentioned it a few months ago, I think. He paused. Everyone else stayed silent. Well, he said slowly, we have internal guidelines, obviously. Legal reviews, NDAs, that sort of thing. Right, I nodded. And how does your firm handle conflict of interest disclosures? Evan narrowed his eyes. What are you getting at? Just wondering, I said. Hypothetically, if an employee at a firm used company property to impersonate others online and interfere with someone's business, that would violate a lot of compliance policies, wouldn't it? The room went dead. Evan's face drained a shade. I could see Lucy's eyes flicker between us. What are you talking about? He asked, voice sharp. I leaned forward slightly, still calm. I have IP logs, timestamps, and screenshots. 4 accounts, all created using a proxy subnet tied to your firm. One of them accessed my website over 30 times. 2 posted fake comments. 1 messaged a client. And all within the time frame you ghosted me after Christmas. Chelsea shifted awkwardly on the couch. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't accuse. I simply let the facts hang. I haven't done anything like that, Evan said flatly. That's absurd. Okay, I said. Good to hear. Because I have a letter drafted by my legal team. I haven't served it yet. But if any more rumors circulate, I'm prepared to escalate. Now the silence was no longer stunned. It was afraid. My dad sat back, looking at Evan with a new expression, one I'd never seen from him before. Doubt. And then, just like that, Evan laughed. But it wasn't his usual confident laugh. It was forced. Dry? You're bluffing, he said. I smiled. Am I? I pulled out my phone, opened the email, showed it to my dad. 1 page. Headers. Footers. Signatures. He read it. Looked at Evan. Didn't say a word. That's when I stood up and said, we should get going. Megan followed. Calm. Composed. And as we walked to the door, Evan didn't stop us. Didn't call out. Didn't say goodbye. Because he knew. He was no longer the one holding the narrative. He'd fired his shot. And now? It was my move. But the full revenge, that was still coming. And it wouldn't be loud. Or fast. Or showy. It would be patient. Surgical. I already had the setup. Now all I needed was the moment. And I knew exactly when it would come. It took 6 weeks. That was the timeline. Not 6 days. Not a single explosive confrontation. That's not how people like Evan collapse. People like him, people who build their worth on image, control, and status, they don't go down in one punch. They unravel, thread by thread, publicly, quietly, completely. And my job wasn't to throw fire. It was to pull threads. See, after that dinner, after I presented the facts without shouting, without emotion, without even raising my voice, Evan's silence said everything. He didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't try to deny it further, because he knew the moment he pushed back, I'd serve that legal letter. And in his world, finance, corporate advisory, investor relations, perception is everything. Even the whisper of an internal compliance probe can be fatal. And I was counting on that. Because I didn't want him just exposed. I wanted him isolated. I wanted him to watch everything he hoarded, the reputation, the reverence, the admiration, slip from his grasp while he stood there, powerless. So I set things in motion. The first move? Whispered accountability. I contacted a contact, Sarah, who worked in financial compliance at another firm. We weren't close, but we'd crossed paths at a few marketing panels, and I'd helped her company navigate a branding crisis once. I sent her a carefully worded email. Not accusatory, just informative. It said, "Hey Sarah, just wondering. Hypothetically, what's the protocol if someone at a finance firm is using company IPs to interfere with private businesses through impersonation or defamation? I have a friend in that boat. Curious how it usually plays out internally." Sarah responded 5 minutes later. "That's grounds for immediate investigation. IT logs, HR review, maybe legal. No joke, especially if it touches client-facing roles." That's all I needed. Because I knew Evan was about to hit his final interview for the VP role. Knew he was likely going through internal vetting, maybe even background review. So I waited until 2 days before that interview, and I submitted an anonymous tip through his company's compliance portal. Again, no accusations, just facts. I included a short summary of what I'd found, timestamps, site visits, impersonation attempts, and attached the IP trace logs Noel had uncovered. No name, no contact info, just documentation. And then I walked away. No more pushing, no more checking in. I let gravity do the rest. And gravity didn't disappoint. It started with whispers. Lucy texted me 3 days later. "Something's going on with Evan. He canceled our brunch. Said he's dealing with a work crisis." Know anything? I didn't reply. Then Ryan posted something cryptic on his story, a quote card that said, "Pride is the mask of insecurity." Subtle, petty, but telling. By week 2, Chelsea went dark on social media, deleted her Instagram, closed comments on Facebook. By week 3, Evan finally called. I didn't answer. He called again, and again. On the 6th call, I picked up. Not because I was curious, but because I wanted to hear it. His voice cracked as soon as I said hello. "I don't know what you did," he started, "but they're reviewing everything. My emails, my browsing history, my internal activity logs. They said someone submitted an anonymous complaint. Do you know anything about that?" I didn't say anything. "Alex," he said, voice strained. "This isn't just some prank. They're taking it seriously. I'm on suspension pending review. I was this close to the VP seat." I let that hang, then finally said, "You shouldn't have lied. You don't understand," he snapped. "They're talking about terminating me. I've been there 9 years. You tried to wreck my name," I said, my voice calm. "You spread lies to my clients. You whispered stories to the family. You made burner accounts. You tried to get me blacklisted in my own field." He didn't deny it. Instead, he said something that shocked me. "I didn't think it would matter. You always acted like you were above everything. Like you didn't care what people thought." I blinked. And there it was. The root of it all. He couldn't stand that I wasn't competing. That I wasn't playing the same insecure game. That I was just living, quietly and fully, without asking for applause. "You tried to punish me for being quiet," I said. "And now you're mad that the noise finally caught up to you." He didn't respond. Eventually, he hung up. 2 days later, my mom called. She was crying. "I just got off the phone with Evan," she said. "He lost the promotion. They're offering him a transition severance to resign quietly. He said someone sabotaged him." I didn't reply. She paused, then added, "Did you?" And for the first time in my life, I said something to my mother I never thought I'd say. I protected myself. That's all. She didn't argue. She just said, "I understand," and hung up. After that, the family dynamic shifted like tectonic plates. Chelsea filed for separation 2 months later. My dad, still shaken, finally asked me to sit down and review the family trust with him. Not Evan. Just me. Quietly. Privately. Lucy and Ryan both texted to say they were sorry for believing Evan, for not asking questions, for going along with it. I didn't hold it against them. Evan had always known how to charm a room. But now, he couldn't even get a table. Last I heard, he moved to a smaller city, took a non-executive role at a second-tier firm. His name, once tossed around with admiration at family dinners, was now only mentioned in cautious tones. As for me, my business doubled. That European tech startup I mentioned? They asked me to join as a partner advisor. I gave a TEDx talk 6 months later. Megan and I bought a cabin in the mountains. And for the first time in my adult life, my family stopped calling me a freelancer. They just called me Alex. And Evan? He never called again. Not for my birthday. Not for holidays. Not even when our dad turned 66 and gave a speech that ended with, "Some people build success. Some people borrow it. Only one lasts." He looked right at me when he said it. So yeah, I didn't scream. I didn't plot revenge like a movie villain. I just stood still, while Evan walked himself into a corner he couldn't escape from. And in the end, the truth did the work for me. He tried to bury me with silence, so I taught him what silence really feels like. My name's Glenn, I'm 27, and I've always been the quiet one in the family. Not because I don't have opinions or dreams, but because in my family, being quiet was the only way to survive without sparking another round of comparisons or insults. My dad, in particular, has always had a way of making me feel smaller, as if every accomplishment I've ever achieved is just a shadow of what my cousin, Mark, managed to do. If Mark got a promotion, my dad would sigh and ask why I hadn't thought to aim higher in my own job. If Mark bought a car, my dad would mutter about how I was still wasting money on rent instead of investing. It was always something, and over the years, I learned to just shrink into myself. Keep my head down, smile when spoken to, and avoid drawing attention to the fact that I was constantly being measured against someone else's yardstick. That dynamic was in full swing at Mark's wedding. It was one of those big, extravagant affairs, the kind where you can practically smell the money in the air, with the floral arrangements taller than me and the champagne flowing like water. My mom had been gushing for weeks about how perfect everything was going to be, and my dad made sure to remind me several times that this was what happens when you make something of yourself. It didn't matter that I had a decent job, that I paid my own bills, or that I had recently been promoted. None of that counted because it didn't compare to Mark's six-figure salary or the house he'd bought with his fiancée. I almost didn't go. Sitting through another night of thinly veiled insults and sideways glances didn't exactly scream good time to me. But my mom insisted, saying it would be unforgivable to miss it. So I put on my nicest suit, one that fit fine but wasn't tailored like Mark's probably was, and showed up, already bracing myself for the night ahead. I remember standing near the back of the reception hall, trying to blend into the wallpaper as the toasts began. People laughed, clinked glasses, and shared stories about the happy couple. For a while, I thought maybe I'd get through it without incident. Maybe I'd just quietly eat my dinner, watch Mark and his bride dance, and slip out before anyone noticed me. But then it happened. My dad stood up, holding his champagne glass, and cleared his throat. The room hushed instantly because my dad has this way of commanding attention, not because people respect him, but because his voice cuts sharp and loud, like he's daring anyone to ignore him. He smiled, that proud, booming kind of smile he saves for moments like this, and looked right at Mark. "Now this," he said, raising his glass higher. "This is what a real son looks like." The words hit me before I fully processed them. My dad wasn't just toasting Mark. He turned his head slightly, enough for everyone to follow his gaze toward me at the back of the room. "Not the failure sulking in the corner," he added, his voice dripping with disdain. Glenn could learn a thing or two about what it means to make your family proud. I felt the heat rise in my face instantly. The room fell into an awful silence, the kind that stretches and suffocates. People shifted in their seats, eyes darting between me and my dad, unsure whether to laugh, to say something, or to keep quiet. My cousin's fiancée had this frozen smile on her face, like she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. I forced a smile, my lips twitching with the effort, and raised my glass just slightly, as if to play along with the joke. Except it wasn't a joke. It never was, not with him. Inside, though, I was shaking. Shaking with anger, humiliation, and this overwhelming mix of emotions I'd buried for years. All the times he'd dismissed me, cut me down, or told me I wasn't enough, they were all boiling up in that moment. And while everyone else looked away awkwardly, I stared straight at my dad, keeping my smile plastered on even as my chest tightened. Because what no one in that room realized, not my dad, not my mom, not even Mark, was that I wasn't the same Glenn they'd spent years belittling. I had something they didn't know about. Something I had been quietly building, step by step, while they were too busy mocking me to notice. And as I stood there, swallowing my pride and pretending to laugh it off, I realized this was it, the moment everything would change. But I didn't move. Not yet. I just stood there, glass in hand, looking like the same old Glenn they thought they knew. All while the storm inside me began to rise. And that was only the beginning. I stayed in my corner long after my dad sat back down, laughing with the people at his table as if he had just said something clever instead of cruel. My glass of champagne felt heavy in my hand, and the bubbles tickled my throat when I tried to take another sip. It was the kind of silence inside me that wasn't calm. It was the silence of pressure building, waiting to burst. But on the outside, I kept the same half smile, as if I hadn't just been publicly humiliated in front of over 100 people. I thought that would be the end of it, but if I've learned anything from my family, it's that they never know when to stop. Dinner rolled around, and the seating chart was already set. Of course, I was tucked away at a side table, far from the center where my parents and Mark's immediate family sat. Across from me was a group of distant relatives I barely knew. People who nodded politely, but clearly didn't know what to say after what had just happened. Every time I glanced toward the head table, my dad's voice carried above the others. He laughed loudly, slapped Mark on the back, and even gestured toward me once with a chuckle, making some joke I couldn't hear. Whatever it was, it earned a few uneasy laughs from people who were probably too polite to challenge him. I tried to focus on the food, beautifully plated steak and roasted vegetables, but even that didn't go smoothly. At one point, my mom leaned over from the head table, making sure her voice carried far enough. "Glenn, dear," she called sweetly, "make sure you don't embarrass yourself tonight. Mark's guests don't need your sulking face in all the photos." The way she said it, like it was a gentle reminder, sent a ripple of laughter across her end of the table. I felt my jaw clench, my knife pausing just above the plate. The photographer, who had been walking around snapping candid pictures, froze for a moment and glanced at me. I gave him a stiff nod, silently telling him to move on. No use capturing me mid-humiliation. It didn't stop there. When the dancing began, my dad took it upon himself to remind anyone within earshot that Mark was the pride of the family. He kept telling stories about how hard-working and brilliant Mark was, all while slipping in little digs about me. "Glenn always had different priorities," he said once, swirling his drink. Never could quite figure out where he was going. He said it like I wasn't standing 10 feet away. A couple of people gave me sympathetic glances, but no one dared to speak up. The worst moment came when Mark and his new wife cut the cake. Everyone gathered around, clapping and cheering as they fed each other a slice. I stayed near the back again, content to clap politely without pushing my way forward. But my dad wasn't going to let me blend in. He raised his voice above the crowd. "Hey Glenn, why don't you take a good look? Maybe one day you'll understand what it means to settle down properly, if anyone would even have you." That one stung deeper than I expected. Maybe because it wasn't just about success or money. It was about my life, my relationships, the things I kept private. I heard a few gasps this time. People who finally seemed to realize his words weren't just harmless teasing. Mark's bride looked uncomfortable, shifting on her feet, and even Mark himself looked like he wanted to say something but didn't. I forced another smile, but it was cracking at the edges. Inside, I was seething. Every word, every jab, was stacking higher, and I could feel the weight pressing down. But there was also something else building, resolve. For years, I had swallowed my pride, let them talk, let them laugh. But not anymore. Not after tonight. I left the hall for a while, stepping outside into the cool night air. My hands were trembling, not from weakness, but from the effort it took to hold myself back. I thought about everything I'd worked on in silence, the projects, the plans, the achievements I never shared with them because I knew they'd find a way to twist it. They had no idea who I had become outside their narrow expectations. And as I stood there under the string lights, the muffled sound of music and laughter spilling out from the hall behind me, I knew one thing. The next time I walked back in, I wouldn't be the same Glenn they thought they could mock without consequence. The night wasn't over, and neither was I. I stayed outside longer than I planned, pacing along the edge of the courtyard while the muffled beat of the DJ's music rattled through the hall windows. The air was cool enough to calm my nerves, but my chest still burned. I thought about slipping out entirely, just disappearing into the night and letting them tell whatever story they wanted about why Glenn couldn't handle it. But something in me refused. Walking away would have been the easy thing, the old Glenn's move. The one who kept quiet. Let them win, let them shape the narrative. Not this time. I finally stepped back inside, forcing my expression into something neutral. The party was in full swing by now. People dancing, clinking glasses, and loosening ties. For a moment, I thought I could blend back into the crowd. But the universe, or maybe just my father, wasn't about to let me. I hadn't been back 5 minutes when I noticed my dad standing near the head table with a few older relatives. He was loud as usual, glass in hand, booming voice rising over the music. I almost didn't pay attention until I caught my own name. My stomach tightened. Glenn's the dreamer, he was saying, and the word dripped with sarcasm. Always chasing silly projects. Wastes his money on nonsense instead of investing wisely like Mark. Honestly, it's embarrassing. Sometimes I wonder if he'll ever stop being such a burden. A burden. The word hit me like a slap. I froze in place, half hidden behind a cluster of guests. The relatives he was speaking to shifted uncomfortably, their eyes flicking around as though hoping someone else would cut him off. No one did. My mom, standing right beside him, gave a little shrug and added, "He's always been like that." We gave up hoping he'd change. At least Mark makes us proud. And then, as if that wasn't enough, my dad reached into his pocket and pulled out something that made my blood run cold. He held up his phone, tilting it so everyone could see. On the screen was my LinkedIn profile, my photo, my name, the job title I'd worked so hard to earn. He scrolled through it with a mocking grin. "See? Middle management. Nothing special. Look at this." He acts like it's impressive, but it's nothing compared to what Mark's doing. Glenn just doesn't get it. Always settling for less. Always chasing crumbs. I felt my breath catch in my throat. He was broadcasting my life, my career, mocking me publicly like I was some kind of failed case study. The humiliation was so sharp I felt my ears ringing. And then came the final blow. He lowered his phone and said, "Truth is, if he weren't our son, I doubt we'd even bother with him." It was like the floor dropped out beneath me. My own father, declaring to a crowd that I was essentially worthless. I saw one of my aunts glance at me across the room, her face pale, her mouth opening as if she wanted to say something. But she didn't. No one ever did. I don't remember moving, but suddenly I was closer, standing just far enough to catch every detail of my dad's smug expression. My hands were clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. For years, I had told myself it was better to stay quiet, better not to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. But in that moment, I realized something had shifted. He hadn't just insulted me. He had stripped me bare in front of my entire extended family, ripped away every ounce of dignity I had managed to hold on to. That was the moment I knew things would never go back to how they were. Something inside me hardened, like a door slamming shut. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was done. And as my dad laughed, still clutching his drink like a king surveying his kingdom, I felt a strange calm settle over me. My humiliation had burned itself out, leaving only clarity. He thought he knew me, thought he could drag me through the mud forever without consequence. But he had no idea what was coming. Not yet. I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of laughter that followed my dad's words. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even cruel. It was the awkward, uncertain laughter of people who didn't know what else to do, the kind that fills the silence when something ugly is dropped into the middle of a room. That was somehow worse. The fact that no one called him out, no one said, "Hey, that's enough." They just let it hang there, as though my worthlessness was some kind of unspoken truth. I felt smaller than I ever had before. Smaller than when I was 12 and he called me useless for dropping the ball in a backyard game. Smaller than when he told me at 16 that I'd never make it because I didn't want to study what he wanted. Smaller than when, at 21, he compared my first real job to Mark's internship at a big firm and told me, "That's why no one takes you seriously." All those moments had carved little cuts into me over the years, but this was a knife straight to the chest. I slipped out again, unnoticed this time, back into the courtyard. My head buzzed, and for a few terrifying minutes, I wondered if I might actually faint. I sat down hard on a bench under the string lights, my hands trembling, my breath shallow. The music and laughter from inside felt distant, muffled, like I was underwater. For the first time in a long while, I let myself feel it all: the shame, the anger, the exhaustion of constantly being the family scapegoat. I thought about leaving. I could call a cab, disappear into the night, and let them drink and dance without me. No one would notice. Or if they did, they'd twist it into more proof that I was weak, that I couldn't handle pressure, that I wasn't a real son. That thought crushed me, because it was exactly what my dad would say later, and everyone would nod along. The image of him holding court, glass raised, telling the story of how Glenn stormed out of Mark's wedding because he couldn't handle the spotlight, made me sick. My fists clenched, and I pressed them against my knees, grounding myself. I couldn't give him that. So I stayed sitting there, letting the minutes drag on, the cool air steadying me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a notification. I pulled it out, expecting some pointless app alert, but it was an email I had forgotten was scheduled to arrive that evening. I read the subject line, and for the first time that night, my lips twitched into something close to a real smile. It was from a client. A big one. The kind of contract I'd been chasing quietly for months. The kind of deal that could change things for me completely. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I stared at the subject line, letting the knowledge of what I had tucked away sink in. My dad thought he knew everything about me, but he had no idea how hard I'd been working, what I'd been building. He saw me as a failure because I never flaunted my wins like Mark, because I didn't live to impress him. For the first time all night, I felt a spark, a tiny flame of defiance. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and stood, brushing off my suit. Inside, I was still raw, still wounded, but beneath that, something was forming, a plan. I wasn't going to argue with him, not tonight. I wasn't going to throw a tantrum or beg him to respect me. I had tried all that before, and it had only given him more ammunition. No, this time would be different. When I stepped back inside the hall, I kept to the edges again, quiet, unremarkable, invisible. Let them think they'd broken me. Let them think I was sulking, licking my wounds. Because while they laughed and toasted and danced, I was already thinking ahead. They thought they had stripped me bare in front of everyone. But really, they had given me the one thing I needed most: resolve. The days after the wedding felt like walking around with an open wound. Everywhere I went, I carried the memory of that toast, the sneers, the laughter that followed. Even in the quiet of my apartment, away from the voices that had haunted me my whole life, I could still hear my dad's words. If he weren't our son, I doubt we'd even bother with him. It was the kind of line that seared itself into the back of my mind, replaying when I tried to sleep, echoing when I woke up. But as sharp as the pain was, it did something unexpected. It hardened me. For the first time in years, I stopped asking myself why I wasn't enough for him and started asking a different question. Why did I care? Why was I wasting my life trying to prove myself to people who had already decided I was worthless? That email I had gotten during the wedding sat unopened for 2 days. Not because I didn't want to read it, but because I wanted to face it with clear eyes, not in the haze of humiliation. When I finally opened it, my pulse quickened. It was confirmation. The contract had gone through. A deal I'd been quietly working on for months, balancing late nights after my day job, had landed. My freelance side hustle, something I'd kept mostly to myself, was officially turning into something bigger. I remember staring at the screen, realizing that what I held in my hands was leverage, independence, a future that no one in my family had a say in. And for the first time in a long time, I felt powerful. The months that followed were grueling, but I threw myself into the work with a kind of focus I didn't know I had. I started small. 1 client turned into 2, 2 into 5. My weekends disappeared into strategy sessions, my evenings into endless calls and revisions. But instead of draining me, it fueled me. Each new milestone was like a brick in a wall I was building between myself and their insults. By spring, I was making more from my side hustle than I was from my day job. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not even close friends. I kept it all close to the chest, savoring the secrecy. I had learned the hard way that exposing my wins too early only invited criticism. This time, I'd let the results speak for themselves. Then came the promotion at work. The same job my dad had mocked at the wedding, the middle management role he had sneered at, suddenly expanded. I was tapped to lead a new division. My salary doubled. My title changed. On paper, I was climbing fast. In reality, I was juggling two full-time careers, the corporate ladder by day and my growing business by night. It was exhausting, but every time I thought about quitting, I remembered the look on my dad's face when he waved around my LinkedIn profile. That smug certainty that I was nothing. That memory kept me going. And as the months passed, something in me shifted. I didn't just want to succeed quietly. I wanted to be untouchable, to build a life so far removed from their insults that when the day came, and they tried to drag me down again, their words would clang uselessly against the armor I'd forged. It wasn't just about money, though that came quickly. It was about connections. I started attending industry events, networking with people far outside the orbit of my family. I built friendships with people who saw me not as the failure cousin, but as Glenn, the guy who delivered results, who knew his craft, who had vision. Slowly, I carved out a reputation that had nothing to do with my last name or my family shadow. By the end of the year, I had something my dad could never take from me: respect. Not his, but my own, and that of people who mattered. I bought a place of my own, not a flashy house like Mark's, but a sleek downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that made me feel like I'd finally risen above the noise. And yet, I kept my distance from family gatherings. Every invitation was politely declined. Every call from my mom went to voicemail. They thought I was still sulking, licking my wounds, the same way I had slouched in the back corner of that wedding hall. But I wasn't. I was sharpening my edges, building my foundation, waiting for the moment they least expected. Because deep down, I knew they hadn't just broken me that night. They had set something in motion. And soon, very soon, the balance of power in our family would shift. The turning point came in the most unexpected way. By then, nearly 2 years had passed since the wedding. 2 years of grinding, growing, and quietly carving out a life that looked nothing like the one my dad had mocked. My business was no longer a side hustle. It was a company. I had hired employees, leased an office, and landed contracts that I used to think were reserved for people with last names that opened doors. My day job had become optional, and eventually, I let it go altogether. I walked out on my corporate career without looking back, knowing that I had built something of my own that no one could diminish. The funny thing about success is that it changes the way people look at you. Strangers respected me. Colleagues admired me. Clients trusted me. But my family? They didn't know a thing. As far as they were concerned, I was still sulking Glenn, the disappointment who couldn't measure up to Mark. And I let them think that. For now. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday night, and I was finishing up some contracts when my phone buzzed. It was my mom. I almost didn't answer. I had gotten good at ignoring her calls, but something in me was curious. When I picked up, her voice was thinner than usual, almost nervous. "Glenn," she began, "we need to talk. About your cousin. About finances." That caught my attention. She went on to explain, carefully, that Mark's big lifestyle, the house, the cars, the lavish trips, hadn't been built on the solid ground everyone thought. He was over-leveraged. Badly. The company he'd tied himself to had collapsed, leaving him drowning in debt. His wedding, the one I'd been humiliated at, had been mostly paid for with loans he was now struggling to repay. And the golden boy of the family? He was about to lose everything. I remember sitting back in my chair, stunned. Not because I felt vindicated, though, yes, there was a certain dark satisfaction, but because I suddenly realized something important. My cousin, the shining example I had been compared to my whole life, was no longer untouchable. The pedestal my parents had placed him on had crumbled. And then came the kicker. "Your father thinks, well, he thinks maybe you could help," my mom said carefully. "You've always been decent with money, haven't you?" I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Decent with money. That was her way of skirting around the fact that I had quietly built an entire company they knew nothing about. They had dismissed me for years, and now, when their star had fallen, they were circling back. Not because they cared about me, not because they wanted to acknowledge my growth, but because I was convenient. I didn't answer her right away. I let the silence hang, long enough for her to squirm. "We'll see," I finally said, my voice flat. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment, the city lights spilling across the floor-to-ceiling windows, and I realized something. The balance of power wasn't just shifting, it had already shifted. For the first time, they needed me, and that need was leverage. In the weeks that followed, more details trickled in. Mark's house was close to foreclosure. His credit cards were maxed. His wife, who had expected a life of luxury, was furious. And my dad, the man who had laughed and called me a burden in front of 100 people, he was suddenly quiet, humble even. He wanted me to sit down with the family and talk options. I went, not because I wanted to help, but because I wanted to see them squirm. We met at my parents' house, the same living room where I had been dismissed 1,000 times before. Except this time, I didn't come in meek. I came in wearing a tailored suit, the kind that fit like armor, and a watch I had bought not for show, but as a reminder of what I had earned. When I walked through the door, their faces told me everything. Shock, confusion. My mom's eyes widened. My dad's jaw tightened. Even Mark, pale and worn from stress, blinked like he was seeing me for the first time. Glenn, my dad said stiffly, thanks for coming. We need your advice. Advice. From me. I sat down, calm and deliberate, and let them explain their mess. And as I listened, my mind wasn't on their words. It was on the opportunity unfolding in front of me. For years, they had dismissed me, mocked me, humiliated me. And now, here they were, laying their problems at my feet, desperate for a solution. They thought they were pulling me into their crisis. What they didn't realize was that they had just handed me the perfect setup. I let them talk. That was the first part of the revenge, silence. For years, I had been the one cut off mid-sentence, my thoughts dismissed before I could finish them. Now, I let them pour their desperation into the air. Mark with his trembling hands, explaining the loans he had taken out for the house and the wedding. My mom, wringing her hands about how unfair it all was. And my dad, the man who had once declared I wasn't worth the breath in his lungs, sitting with his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on me, as though the weight of his pride was battling the gravity of his need. I asked questions, calm and measured, like a banker reviewing a loan application. How much was owed? What assets were still in play? Did anyone co-sign? The more they revealed, the deeper their embarrassment grew. They were unraveling, laying out details they never would have admitted if they weren't cornered. And I sat there, pen tapping gently against a notepad, as if I were detached, just another professional evaluating a case. When Mark finished, I leaned back. The room was thick with tension. You're asking for a bailout, I said plainly. From me. No one answered. My mom glanced at my dad. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, my dad cleared his throat. You're in a better place now, aren't you, Glenn? We've heard things. Success. Money coming in. Maybe it's time you contributed to the family in a meaningful way. Meaningful way. My teeth pressed together, but outwardly I stayed calm. He couldn't even bring himself to say the word help without twisting it into a moral lesson. I smiled faintly. So let me get this straight. For years, I've been the failure, the burden, the disappointment. And now, suddenly, I'm the solution. My mom jumped in quickly. That's not what we meant, honey. You know your father exaggerates. Families support each other. And right now, your cousin needs us. No, I corrected, my voice firm but even. Right now, your cousin needs me. And that's very different. The silence that followed was delicious. For the first time in my life, I wasn't on the defensive. They were. I took my time, flipping through the notes I had scribbled down, pretending to weigh their options. Then I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. Here's how this will work, I said. If I'm going to help, there will be conditions. Non-negotiable. Their eyes snapped to me. My dad bristled, but he didn't interrupt. That alone told me everything. He knew he couldn't afford to. First, I continued, I'll set up a trust. Any money I provide goes into that trust, and I control how it's spent. No more reckless decisions, no more loans for luxuries. Second, if I do this, there will be no more jokes at my expense. No more belittling me in front of the family, in public, or in private. Ever again. Mark shifted uncomfortably. My mom tried to plaster on a smile. My dad's face was dark red, his pride bleeding out in silence. Third, I said, letting the words hang in the air. If I step in, you acknowledge me. Not as a failure, not as a burden, but as someone who built something on his own. You don't have to like it, but you will respect it, and you will say it out loud. The weight of those words filled the room. My dad's mouth opened, then closed. His fists tightened on his knees. I could see the war waging in him, pride versus desperation. Finally, his voice came out rough. Fine. I leaned back, satisfied. But inside, I wasn't done. Not even close. Because here's the truth. I had no intention of bailing them out. Not really. The trust one had mentioned? It wasn't just a tool to control them, it was a cage. A way to make sure that every move they made from here on out passed through me. They thought they were getting a lifeline, but what I was really offering was a leash. And as I sat there, watching the people who had mocked me for years squirm in their own desperation, I felt something I hadn't felt since the wedding night. Power. And I wasn't about to waste it. I followed through, but not in the way they expected. Within a week, the trust was established, legally airtight, structured so that every cent passed through me. On paper, it looked like salvation. In reality, it was control. Every bill, every expense, every request had to be approved by me. And I was ruthless. When Mark asked for money to cover a trip to clear his head, I denied it. When my mom tried to slip in a request for family support under his name, I flagged it and shut it down. If it wasn't tied directly to necessity, mortgage stabilization, basic utilities, it didn't pass. At first, they pushed back. My mom called constantly, guilt-tripping me, reminding me that family means sacrifice. My dad tried his old tricks, snide remarks, belittling comments slipped between pleasantries. But the difference now was simple. I had the leverage. Every time he snapped, I reminded him that without me, they had nothing. And every time, he backed down. The cracks in their facade deepened. At family gatherings, people whispered. They all knew something had shifted. Suddenly, the golden boy was broke, and the failure was the one holding the strings. It didn't take long for the story to get out. Mark's debts, my intervention, the trust that had effectively placed me at the head of the table. Relatives who once ignored me now pulled me aside, shaking my hand, congratulating me on stepping up. They saw me differently now, not as the quiet, overlooked cousin, but as the one with real power. Mark grew bitter, his pride eroding with every month he had to come to me like a child asking for allowance. His wife, once all smiles and champagne toasts, left him within the year, unable to stomach the loss of luxury. My mom's voice grew shrill on the phone, trying to disguise panic with politeness. And my dad? Watching him choke on his own pride became the sweetest revenge of all. The man who once stood at a wedding, glass raised high, mocking me in front of 100 people, now had to look me in the eye and say, "Thank you, Glenn," whenever I approved another payment. He said it through gritted teeth, but he said it. Every single time. I didn't need to humiliate him publicly. He was already humiliated in the only way that mattered, by being forced to depend on the son he had called worthless. The final blow came one evening when I visited their house to review documents. As I packed up my briefcase, I stood at the same spot in the living room where he had once told relatives that I was a burden. I turned to him and said, calmly, "Do you still think I'm not a real son?" He didn't answer at first. His face was pale, his jaw working silently. My mom looked down at her hands. Mark stared at the carpet. And then, finally, with a voice that cracked under the weight of everything he had lost, my dad said, "No, you're the one holding this family together." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply nodded, picked up my case, and walked out. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the quiet one in the corner. I wasn't the failure or the disappointment. I was the one they had underestimated, the one they had mocked into silence, until silence became my weapon. And as the door shut behind me, I realized the truth. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is control. The same man who once raised his glass to humiliate me now had to bow his head in acknowledgement. And that was all I ever needed. It was a humid June evening when my dad tossed my brother the keys to a brand new Jeep Grand Cherokee and said, "You've earned this, champ. My name's Austin. I'm 22, and I was standing 5 feet away, holding a plastic bag full of leftover party decorations and a crumpled receipt for folding chairs I'd rented on my own dime. I didn't expect a car. I'm not entitled. But the handshake I got felt more like a warning than a gesture of pride. Like he was saying, "Don't make this about you." And the envelope he slipped me? It wasn't a gift card or a letter of appreciation. It was a neatly printed invoice for half the graduation celebration costs, for $173.88. No signature, no note, just a number. Now, I know how Reddit works. You're probably thinking I'm the golden child who finally got dethroned, or maybe that I'm bitter because my younger brother got a better deal. But here's the thing. I'm the oldest. I've always been the one keeping the peace, doing what's expected, never rocking the boat. I didn't storm out of the party. I didn't even flinch. I helped Mom pack up the coolers. I took down the stupid, "You did it" banner we'd bought off Amazon. And I even gave my brother a pat on the back before I left. He smiled at me like he'd just won something. Like this was a competition, and he was finally catching up. Truth is, he passed high school by the skin of his teeth, and they threw him a full-blown backyard extravaganza with catered food and a rental tent. When I graduated 2 years ago, with honors, I got a frozen lasagna and a Facebook post. Growing up, there was always this unspoken rule in my house. Don't ask. Don't need. Don't expect. My parents weren't cruel. Exactly. Just calculated. If you wanted something, you had to prove you needed it. But even then, it usually ended with a lesson about working hard and building character. I got my first job at 15 bagging groceries and used the money to buy my own school clothes. My brother Jake? He broke his iPhone and had a new one within a week. My mom said, "Well, he needs it for school." I said nothing, like always. The real kicker is, I helped pay for Jake's graduation party. They didn't ask, not directly. It was more like Dad dropping subtle hints about how tight things have been and how it'd mean a lot if I could pitch in. I Venmo'd Mom $250 a few weeks before the party. 2 days later, I bought ice and tablecloths and set up the chairs in the backyard. When it rained the morning of, I helped Dad lug the whole setup under the carport. He didn't say thanks. He just nodded and said, "We'll make it work." I kept brushing it off. It's just money, right? It's just one day. But the thing is, it never was just one day. It was a pattern, a slow erosion of fairness that I'd swallowed for years because I didn't want to be difficult. I figured maybe I was imagining things, that maybe I was just more sensitive than Jake. Maybe I was too quiet, too passive, not the kind of kid that demanded attention. But when I saw that Jeep, shiny, spotless, with a giant red bow like something out of a car commercial, I felt something in my chest tighten. Not jealousy, not even anger, just confirmation. This wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. Jake didn't look shocked when he got the car. He acted like he knew, like they'd all been keeping the secret from me. I stood there watching them, Dad clapping him on the shoulder, Mom taking pictures, Jake grinning like he was in a music video. And for the first time, I didn't feel like part of the family. I felt like a guest, an unwanted one. Later that night, after everyone left and I was gathering up the trash, my dad pulled me aside. He had this serious look on his face, like he was about to tell me something important. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd acknowledge everything. Maybe he'd say, "Hey, I know this doesn't feel fair. I appreciate everything you've done." But instead, he handed me that envelope with the invoice and said, "You're an adult now. You understand how this works." I didn't argue. I didn't even open it until I got back to my apartment. I sat on the edge of my bed, stared at the number, and just felt numb. Not surprised. Not hurt. Just done. 3 days later, I transferred the remaining balance of my savings to cover the bill. I didn't call. I didn't visit. I didn't send a message explaining myself. I just vanished. A month passed before I heard from them. Then the text started. First from Mom. "Hey honey, hope you're okay. Haven't seen you in a while." Then from Dad. "Give us a call. There's some stuff we need to figure out." I ignored them both. Then Jake sent me a picture. It was a screenshot of the electric bill, circled in red. "Why is this so high?" he wrote. And that's when I remembered. The gas, electric, water, even the Wi-Fi, all of it was under my name. I'd set it all up when I moved back after college and was helping them while Jake finished school. They never bothered to switch it over. I never reminded them. That was just the beginning. When the text from Jake came through, I just stared at it, letting the screen dim and fade before flipping my phone upside down on the kitchen counter. I didn't reply, didn't feel the need to. Let them sweat. I wasn't angry, not in the way people usually mean it. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't pacing, I wasn't smashing things. I was calm, cold almost. Like the version of me they'd ignored for so long had finally gone quiet. Not because I'd forgiven, but because I'd learned. The electric bill wasn't even the highest one. I knew it was going to get worse. The gas and water were on a cycle delay, so they hadn't seen those yet. I could have warned them. I could have helped them set up the transfer. I could have walked Jake through the online portals, showed Dad where the breaker box was so he'd stop tripping it every time he ran the air fryer and the microwave at the same time. But I didn't. I let the silence speak for me. See, when I moved back home after college, it wasn't supposed to be permanent. It was one of those transitional, just for a few months deals. I was working part-time at a community center, saving up to move out with a buddy who bailed last minute. My parents made it sound like they were doing me a favor, but the moment I unpacked my bags, I realized I was more of a tenant than a son. They even gave me a list of shared responsibilities, which basically meant I paid for all the utilities and did half the chores. Jake? He had one job, don't flunk out. And even that was negotiable. For a while, I tolerated it. Told myself it was just how things were. But now, standing on the other side of that unspoken line, it all looked different. And now that I was gone, really gone, they noticed. The lights still came on, the water still ran, the Wi-Fi was still strong. But the bills weren't being paid. And I wasn't answering. The second call came 2 days after Jake's text. This time it was Mom. I let it ring. Then she left a voicemail. Her voice tight, like she was trying to sound sweet, but couldn't quite keep the edge out of it. Austin, I don't know what's going on, but I really think we need to talk. Your father's been getting notices from the utility company, and we're not sure what the issue is. Please, just call us. Let's work this out. Work what out? You mean the part where I funded your party, cleaned up your mess, and got a bill for my trouble? I wish I could say that was the end of it. But it wasn't. That was just the start of the unraveling. About a week later, I went to get my oil changed and found out my bank account had been overdrawn. I logged in and saw a $172 auto payment from the family's old internet provider. My name was still on it. They hadn't even tried to switch it over. So I did what I probably should have done the day I left. I went full scorched earth. I canceled everything. Electric, gas, water, internet, even the trash pickup. And here's the thing. I didn't warn them. I didn't text. I didn't call. I just clicked cancel and let the storm roll in. It hit fast. That weekend, I went hiking with some friends. No service, no signal. I didn't even check my phone until I got back. When I turned it on, it lit up like Times Square. 27 missed calls, mostly from Mom and Dad. Jake had left 2 voicemails and sent me a string of increasingly unhinged texts. Dude, WTF, why is the power off? You know Mom and Dad are freaking out, right? I had friends over, and we had to play cards like it's 1900. Real funny, man. Turn it back on. Seriously, I didn't respond. Instead, I made a cup of coffee and sat on my tiny apartment balcony watching the sun set behind the strip mall across the street. I could practically hear Jake stomping around the house in the dark, shouting at Alexa, and forgetting she doesn't work when there's no Wi-Fi. My mom lighting candles like they were prepping for a hurricane. My dad fumbling with the breaker panel while blaming the electric company. It should have felt petty, but it didn't. It felt necessary. That night, I finally listened to one of the voicemails from Dad. His voice was clipped and angry, like he couldn't decide if he wanted to guilt me or threaten me. Austin, this has gone too far. You're acting like a child. You want to prove a point? Fine. But you don't get to just walk away from your responsibilities and leave your family in the dark, literally. Grow up. Grow up. That one stuck with me. They never seemed to mind when I was grown up enough to pay bills, fix things, tutor Jake through math he never studied for, or haul groceries up 3 flights of stairs because Mom forgot we didn't have an elevator. But the moment I stopped, suddenly I was a child again. A few days passed. I still didn't reply. Then came the betrayal. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a call from my old landlord, the one who owned the house my parents were renting. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. I let it go to voicemail, then checked it later in the break room. Hey Austin, sorry to bother you at work, but I've got a bit of a situation here. Your folks are saying there was some kind of billing mix-up, and they gave me your name and number for the utilities. I just need to confirm that you've been handling that, and whether you'll be continuing to do so. Give me a ring when you get a chance. They gave him my number. They brought me into it. Again, I called him back that night and explained, calmly, politely, that I had moved out over a month ago and had nothing to do with the house anymore. He was quiet for a moment, then sighed and said, okay, thanks for letting me know. That explains a few things. I hung up, then sat at my kitchen table for a long time, just staring at my hands. That was the moment it clicked. This wasn't just about bills or favoritism or even the car. It was about control, about never letting me fully leave. Because if I was still the responsible one, still the provider, still the good son, then they could pretend things hadn't changed. They could ignore how uneven it had always been. But now that I'd stepped out of that role, they were flailing. I didn't hear from them for 2 weeks after that. Total radio silence. Then, on the third Sunday, Mom showed up at my apartment, unannounced. I opened the door and saw her standing there with a Tupperware container and that overly bright smile she always used when she wanted something. "Hi, honey. I brought your favorite. Lasagna." Of course it was lasagna. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Is everything okay?" She hesitated, then gave a weak little laugh. "Well, not exactly. We've been having a bit of trouble since you left. I think maybe we didn't realize how much you were doing." "You didn't realize?" "No. You just didn't care. Until it cost you." She pushed the container into my hands and looked past me like she expected to be invited in. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside but didn't say anything. She walked in, looked around like she was appraising the place, then sat down at my kitchen table like she'd done it 100 times. I stayed standing. She cleared her throat. "Your father's been under a lot of stress. The landlord's threatening to raise the rent, and Jake, well, he's not handling things very well. We could really use your help getting everything sorted out." Sorted out. Like I was a missing puzzle piece in their broken picture. I set the Tupperware on the counter without opening it. "You gave the landlord my number." She flinched, barely, then smiled again. "We just thought maybe you could explain things better. You've always been so good at that. Good at cleaning up your messes, you mean." I didn't say it, but I think she saw it in my face. "Austin," her voice softened. "You're part of this family. We're supposed to help each other." That's when I finally spoke. "I was part of the family when I helped throw the party, when I cleaned, when I paid your bills. But the moment I needed even a sliver of recognition, I got a handshake and an invoice." She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She just blinked at me like she didn't understand what I was saying, like she hadn't already lost me and didn't even know it. She stood after that, slowly, her shoulders sagging just enough for me to see the cracks in her performance. "Just think about it, okay? We're all struggling." I didn't answer. She left without another word. The lasagna stayed on the counter for 2 days before I finally threw it away. And just when I thought it couldn't go any lower, just when I thought I had seen the worst they could do, I found out what they did next. That's where things took a turn. After my mom left that day, something shifted in me. Not dramatically. There was no grand speech, no cinematic swell of music as I turned some metaphorical corner. It was quieter than that. Like the sound of something finally settling after years of being jammed out of place. I didn't cry. I didn't punch a wall. I didn't even eat the lasagna. I just stood in my tiny kitchen, watching the Tupperware fog up on the counter like it was holding some buried symbol of everything I'd left behind. I'd spent years trying to be useful enough to be noticed, quiet enough to not be a burden, good enough to earn something. Recognition. Gratitude. Maybe just a little respect. Instead, I got a casserole and a plea to come back. But I wasn't going back. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Still, it wasn't like I magically had everything figured out. That's not how hitting rock bottom works. Nobody tells you this, but when you finally stop being someone's emotional doormat, it doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels lonely. And for me, it also felt broke. When I'd walked away from my family, I walked away from everything I'd built while living under their roof. No utilities in my name meant no paper trail. And without a consistent address during college, I'd somehow managed to have less proof of stability than Jake, who had never worked a day in his life. It also turned out that moving out with no plan and no backup was way more expensive than I'd expected. My new place was a glorified shoebox. The walls were thin, the heater clicked like a Geiger counter, and the water pressure in the shower felt like being exhaled on by an asthmatic ghost. I had a futon mattress on the floor and a borrowed coffee table with one leg shorter than the others. My bank balance hovered near zero. Some nights I ate peanut butter on crackers and called it dinner. Others, I skipped meals entirely and told myself I wasn't that hungry. But for all the stress, for all the exhaustion, I felt free. Miserable, sure, but free. There's something oddly peaceful about being left with nothing. It forces you to take stock. You stop chasing approval because there's no one left to impress. You stop performing because the audience is gone. And for the first time in my life, I had space to figure out who I was without the weight of being the responsible one. Still, I won't lie. The first few weeks were brutal. I kept expecting a text that never came. Not an apology. I didn't even hope for that anymore. But just some sign that they saw me, that they realized what they'd done. Instead, the silence stretched out like a rubber band, and I started bracing for when it might snap. Work wasn't helping much. I was still at the community center, putting in hours that barely paid minimum wage, trying to stretch every dollar like it was elastic. I was tired all the time. My days blurred together. Wake up, eat something cheap, bus to work, smile through tasks, bus home, crash. But even in the middle of all that, something started to shift. It started small. One night, after closing up the center, my supervisor pulled me aside. Her name was Carla, mid-50s, sharp eyes, no-nonsense kind of woman who always wore sneakers with bright orange laces. She'd always been kind, but distant. That night, though, she sat me down and said, "You've been running the teen program better than the last 3 people who tried. You ever think about going full-time?" I blinked at her. "I can't really afford to." She snorted. "I'm in as a career, not for the money." And that was it. Just one offhand comment. But it stuck with me. A few days later, one of the teens in the after-school chess club gave me a crumpled drawing of the two of us playing together. He'd written "Best Coach" in the corner, complete with backward letters and a big, toothy smile. I taped it to the wall in my apartment, right above the heater. I started noticing things, like how I felt more like myself around the kids than I ever had around my own family. Like how I wasn't anxious all the time when I was on my own, even if I was hungry. Like how, even in my worst moments, I was finally building something for me, not for someone else's approval. So I leaned into it. I picked up a second job on weekends tutoring middle schoolers in math. I started reading books on youth development and behavioral psychology. I applied for a small grant from the city to expand the center's teen program, and we got it. Carla told me I had the kind of brain that doesn't know how to give up. I'd never heard that before, not from anyone. And slowly, I started to rebuild. I got a real mattress. Bought it secondhand off a college kid who was moving out. Then a desk. Then a tiny bookshelf I found at a garage sale. My apartment still looked like a Craigslist special, but it was mine. Every creaky floorboard, every chipped tile. I chose this place. No one handed it to me. No one made me feel guilty for being there. I reconnected with a friend from college, Jamie, who ran a podcast about community stories and asked if I'd be willing to talk about my work at the center. I was nervous, but I did it. I told my story, not the family drama, just the part about working with kids, building programs, learning how to lead. The episode got more listens than any other they'd done that month. Someone from a local nonprofit heard it and offered me a paid consulting gig helping them build their own youth mentorship initiative. The gig turned into a side hustle. The side hustle turned into a LinkedIn profile. The LinkedIn profile turned into networking. And for the first time in my life, people were reaching out to me because they valued what I had to say, not because they needed me to clean up their messes. But even as things were climbing, the ghosts of my past lingered. My phone buzzed one night while I was prepping lesson plans for a summer camp. It was Jake. First time I'd heard from him in months. "Jake, hey, you around?" I stared at the message for a full minute, then typed a short reply. "Me? Yeah. 3 dots. Then nothing. Then finally, "Jake, they're selling the house." I didn't respond right away. Jake said they can't keep up. Too expensive. Too much upkeep. Not enough help. Help. Right. Jake, they're fighting a lot. I'm probably gonna move in with a friend for a while. Just thought you should know. I should have felt vindicated. Maybe I did, on some level. But mostly, I felt hollow. Then he sent one more text. "Jake, it's weird without you here." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because part of me still wanted to believe that sentence meant more than it did. That maybe, finally, he was starting to see what I had gone through. But I knew better. The next day, I got an email from my mom. A long one. She didn't apologize. Not directly. But she did say this. "We didn't realize how much we depended on you until you left. I think we took you for granted. I know we don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope we haven't lost you completely." I didn't reply. Not because I hated her. Not because I was angry. But because I needed more than words. I needed time. I needed space. And more than anything, I needed to see who I was without them defining it for me. I went for a walk that evening. Just around the block. Nothing special. But the sun was setting, and the air was soft in that late spring way that makes everything feel temporary and important at the same time. I looked around at the neighborhood I was slowly learning to love. The little diner on the corner. The bookstore with the crooked sign. The laundromat with the neon light that always flickered like it was winking at me. And I realized something. I was okay. Not perfect. Not healed. But okay. I had climbed out of a place I didn't even realize I was drowning in. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up, piece by piece. I had chosen myself, and I was still choosing myself every day. And that was worth more than any car, any handshake, any forced smile at a graduation party I paid for but wasn't really invited to. But just when I thought the story was finally settling into peace, just when I thought the dust had cleared and I could breathe, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in slightly shaky ink. Inside, a legal notice. They were suing me. The envelope was thin, too light to feel threatening, too plain to signal danger. I nearly tossed it aside with the grocery ads and random credit card offers, but something about the handwriting stopped me. It wasn't neat. My mom's cursive had always been picture perfect, like it belonged on thank you cards. This was rough, uneven, like the person writing it wasn't used to holding a pen for long. I slid it open with my thumb, expecting maybe a passive-aggressive note or a long, rambling apology someone didn't have the courage to send by text. But no, it was a notice of small claims court. I stood there in my kitchen, holding the paper with fingers that had gone ice cold, scanning the words twice before I understood what they were saying. They were suing me. Specifically, my parents were suing me for abandonment of financial responsibilities, deliberate disruption of service contracts, and, for good measure, emotional distress due to sudden and prolonged absence. My breath caught halfway down my throat. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, or a joke, but there it was, stamped and signed. My own parents had filed paperwork against me. It was almost funny. Almost. I sat down at my rickety kitchen table, the letter spread out like some absurd artifact from a twisted alternate timeline, and tried to piece together what they could possibly be thinking. The electric bills? I'd canceled those after moving out. The Wi-Fi? Same story. The lease? My name was never on it. They had no legal claim. And yet they'd bundled together a bunch of emotional grievances, dressed them up in legalese, and sent them off like a parting shot. That's when the nausea hit, not from fear, but from disgust. This wasn't just about money or missed utility payments. This was about punishment, about control. They couldn't guilt me into coming back. They couldn't manipulate me through Jake. They couldn't tug on the nostalgia of we're still family anymore. So this was the Hail Mary. One last desperate attempt to drag me back into the pit. I could have reacted a lot of ways. I could have ranted, screamed into a pillow, driven straight to their house and banged on the door until they opened it, just so I could throw the letter in their faces. But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I sat very still. I let the fury settle like sediment in water. And I realized something that sent a slow smile creeping across my face. They just gave me exactly what I needed. See, until that moment, everything had been personal, emotional, a tangled web of guilt and resentment, hurt feelings and messy family ties. I hadn't fought back, not really, because I didn't want to stoop to their level. I told myself I was taking the high road, that I was above petty revenge. But this wasn't family anymore. This was business, and I was good at business. Over the next few days, I did what any responsible, wronged adult would do. I lawyered up. Not officially. I couldn't afford a full-blown attorney, but I did what I could. I reached out to a friend from the youth nonprofit who'd gone to law school and now worked at a legal aid clinic. He reviewed the paperwork with me over coffee one evening, flipping through it with the same expression you'd reserve for a particularly dumb internet conspiracy theory. They don't have a leg to stand on, he said, thumbing through the pages. None of this would hold in court. It's not even clear what they're asking for. There's no contract, no formal agreement, and certainly no damages they can prove. They're just mad you stopped paying for things you didn't owe in the first place. I nodded. So what do I do? He leaned back in his chair. You have two options. You can show up, present your case, and win, which you will. Or you can counterclaim. I blinked. Counterclaim. He smiled. For your emotional distress. For the unpaid reimbursements. For the way they've weaponized your role in the family. You'd need documentation, of course, but from what you've told me, you'd have a compelling case. Especially if you framed it as a pattern of exploitation. My mind raced. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just reacting. I was planning. That night, I started gathering everything. Receipts, bank statements, emails, text messages, photos from the graduation party, where I was clearly doing setup and teardown while Jake took selfies with his car. Venmo screenshots of every loan that was never repaid. The invoice Dad handed me with my name written in smug, precise print. But that wasn't all. I started documenting my childhood. Not the vague stuff, they were mean, or they favored Jake, but specifics. Times when I'd paid for groceries while they were on vacation. Months I covered the water bill just until things stabilized. Birthdays I spent alone while they threw parties for Jake. The time Mom promised to help with my college books and never sent the money, leaving me scrambling to buy a used physics textbook 2 weeks into the semester. The memories poured out like water through a cracked dam. At first, it was exhausting, but then it became energizing, like I was reclaiming something, taking back the narrative, turning the emotional quicksand I'd been stuck in for years into solid, documented proof. I even made a spreadsheet, a detailed, color-coded spreadsheet. It had columns for the date, the amount of money I'd contributed, the context, whether it was repaid, and any attached evidence, screenshot, email, or physical receipt. By the end of the week, it was over 40 items long, thousands of dollars, dozens of hours, a whole adolescence, neatly quantified. But revenge isn't just about justice. It's about timing. And I had the perfect opportunity. Remember that podcast I did? The one where I talked about the youth center work? Well, turns out it had gotten some traction. Enough that a local radio station invited me to do a follow-up interview. The topic? Unsung local heroes. Kind of cheesy, but I didn't mind. This time, I talked a little more openly. I didn't name names, but I spoke about what it means to grow up in a home where love is conditional, where expectations are skewed, where being the good kid means being invisible. I talked about the pain of realizing your own family sees you as a tool, not a person. I talked about walking away and building something for yourself. It wasn't a sob story. It was a statement. And people listened. That week, the podcast episode jumped in downloads. I got 3 new consulting requests. Carla at the community center forwarded me an email from a donor who wanted to fund an expansion and asked if I'd be willing to help lead it. Meanwhile, back at the house, things were unraveling. Jake texted me again. This time, it wasn't about the bills. It was about the house sale. Apparently, Dad had miscalculated some zoning issue, and the buyers were threatening to back out. Money was tight. Mom was in one of her moods. Jake asked if we could talk sometime soon. Just us. I didn't answer. I was too busy putting together a packet for my counterclaim. It was 30 pages long, labeled, indexed, tabbed. The cover sheet read, Counterclaim in response to case number 44391, Austin Mitchell versus Charles and Diane Mitchell. Inside was everything. And I mean everything. The utilities, the receipts, the graduation invoice, the text from Dad saying, "You're an adult now. You understand how this works." The voicemail from Mom asking for help again. The documentation showing I'd moved out and terminated all responsibilities legally. Even screenshots of the landlord confirming I'd ended my relationship with the property before any alleged disruptions. My friend from the legal clinic helped me format it all. He even coached me on how to deliver it. Calmly, professionally, no raised voices. I wasn't going to lose control. Not this time. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. But here's the kicker. A few days before the court date, I got another envelope. This one wasn't a legal notice. It was a handwritten letter from my dad. Inside, he said they wanted to withdraw the claim, that it had gotten out of hand, that they were just trying to get your attention, that they missed me, wanted to reconnect, and hoped I could come home for dinner just like old times. I didn't respond. Instead, I submitted my counterclaim anyway, because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about setting a precedent. I was done being the one who folded, the one who forgave without acknowledgement, the one who cleaned up everyone's messes and got blamed when the room was still dirty. This wasn't a rebellion. It was a boundary, and once it was set, there was no going back. But what happened in the courtroom? Well, let's just say they weren't expecting what I walked in with. The courthouse smelled like old carpet and fluorescent lights. That weird, sterile scent of bureaucracy and budget cuts. I sat alone on a wooden bench outside courtroom 2B, my manila folder balanced neatly on my lap, fingers resting on the edge like I was holding a loaded weapon. In a way, I was. The door creaked open. Austin Mitchell, the clerk called. I stood, smoothed out my shirt, and walked inside. The room was small, not like what you see on TV. No grand jury box, no towering judge's bench. Just a few rows of chairs, a couple of desks, and a magistrate with reading glasses perched low on her nose. She looked up as I entered, nodding me toward one side. Across the room, I spotted my parents sitting stiffly behind the petitioner's table. My father was in his usual business casual, polo shirt tucked into khakis, arms crossed, jaw clenched like a man trying very hard not to say something he'd regret. My mother looked more composed. She wore a navy blue blouse and matching earrings, hair curled just right, the corners of her mouth tight with forced civility. Her eyes flicked toward me but didn't linger. I sat down. Quiet. Calm. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, the magistrate said, flipping through a file, you're bringing forth a claim regarding abandonment of financial responsibilities and alleged emotional distress. Is that correct? My father cleared his throat and leaned forward. Yes, Your Honor. Our son, Austin, was financially responsible for several services at our residence. He canceled them abruptly without notice, which caused significant hardship. We also believe his sudden departure caused undue emotional strain. The magistrate raised an eyebrow. Do you have documentation showing these agreements were legally binding or contractually understood? Dad hesitated. Well, no. But did he sign anything agreeing to these responsibilities? No, but he lived with us and... She nodded, holding up a hand. We'll come back to that. Mr. Mitchell, she turned to me. Do you have a response to these claims? I stood, opened the folder, and handed over a copy of my counterclaim. Yes, Your Honor. I have submitted a detailed packet of evidence refuting every claim. Additionally, I'm filing a counterclaim citing long-term financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and attempts at legal harassment. My mother's face twitched. Dad's arms uncrossed slowly, like he'd just realized this wasn't going to go the way he thought. The magistrate flipped through the pages. Her brow furrowed. This is extensive. Yes, ma'am. I've included dates, financial records, and supporting evidence. To be clear, I do not seek punitive damages. I only seek reimbursement for money I spent on their behalf and an official dismissal of their claims. And then I sat back down. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. The silence on their side of the room said everything. Over the next 30 minutes, I calmly explained the timeline. How I was never on the lease. How I paid for utilities at their request, but was never legally obligated to do so. How I'd sent funds multiple times for emergencies and temporary help, none of which were ever repaid. How they handed me an invoice after Jake's graduation party, despite knowing I had already contributed hundreds of dollars. And how they filed this suit not in pursuit of justice, but as a tactic to regain control over someone who finally refused to play along. The magistrate asked questions. I answered them. Clearly. Directly. When it came time for my parents to respond, my dad's voice wavered. He's twisting things. We were a family. Families help each other. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The magistrate spoke first. Mr. Mitchell, you brought your son to court under claims that have no legal merit and now appear rooted in emotional disappointment rather than factual wrongdoing. She turned to her monitor, typed for a moment, then looked back up. My ruling is as follows. The plaintiff's claim is dismissed in its entirety. The defendant's counterclaim is valid. I am awarding him full reimbursement in the amount of $3,241.75 to be paid within 60 days. This court considers the matter closed. The gavel came down with a dull thunk. And just like that, it was over. I stood up, thanked the magistrate, and walked out of the courtroom. My parents remained seated, stunned into silence. Dad's hands were clenched in his lap. Mom blinked slowly, like someone waking from a bad dream they thought was real. They didn't follow me out. I stepped into the sunlight and took the deepest breath I'd had in months. Maybe years. The kind that goes all the way down into your chest and lifts something you didn't know was there. I expected to feel triumph, vengeance, the satisfaction of watching them lose. But instead, I felt free. Not the kind of freedom that comes from running away, but the kind that comes from choosing yourself and knowing you're not going to turn back. The check arrived 3 weeks later. No note, no apology, just a cold envelope with my name on it and a signature at the bottom of a cashier's check from my parents' joint account. I deposited it. I used some of it to fix my car, paid off a credit card, and took the rest to buy a brand new mattress. The real kind, memory foam, pillow top, the works. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized it was the first time in years I'd made a purchase for myself without guilt. No strings, no expectations, just peace. Jake reached out once more after that. Jay, I heard what happened. They're pretty upset. Me, so was I. For years. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. He was still in it, still tangled up in their web. Maybe he'd figure it out one day. Maybe not. I wasn't waiting around to find out. 6 months later, I was promoted to program director at the youth center. I'd started a mentorship initiative for teens aging out of foster care, using the same skills I'd developed surviving my own family. It was thriving. I was thriving. I moved into a better apartment, more space, real furniture, even a little balcony where I kept a tomato plant I somehow hadn't killed yet. I didn't post about the court case. I didn't gossip. I didn't throw it in anyone's face. But word got around. My mom tried calling once, Christmas Eve, left a voicemail that started with a shaky, "Hi honey," and ended with, "Just think about coming by. We miss you." I deleted it. Because here's what they never understood. I didn't want revenge. I wanted respect. I wanted acknowledgement. And when I stopped hoping for it, I got something better, self-worth. The truth is, I wasn't the problem. I was the solution they took for granted. The backbone they leaned on until it finally gave out. And now? Now they were learning what life looked like without it. Without me. I don't know if they'll ever get it. Maybe they'll rewrite the story in their heads. Tell themselves I turned cold, that I overreacted, that I abandoned them. That's fine. Let them. Because I know the truth. And now, thanks to them, so does the court. So does the community. And most importantly, so do I. I'm not their handyman. I'm not their doormat. I'm not their scapegoat, or ATM, or silent fixer. And I don't owe them anything anymore. I'm Jacob, 34 years old, and if there's one thing I've learned in the last 2 years, it's this. Family can cut deeper than any enemy ever could. Not because of what they do, but because you never see it coming, because you trust them, love them, and carry the blind hope that one day they'll treat you the same way. Growing up, I was the reliable one. The one who didn't crash the family car, didn't sneak out of the house, didn't scream at our mom in the middle of church. That was my younger sister, Megan. She had a flair for drama and a golden halo in our parents' eyes, no matter what mess she caused. Me? I got the hand-me-downs and the lectures. Megan got the second chances and the, well, she's going through a phase, excuses. But I didn't resent her. Not at first. I figured families are just messy sometimes. Maybe it'd balance out later in life. So I went to community college, worked full-time, paid off my student loans, and slowly climbed up the ranks at a tech company that didn't care about my last name, just my work. Meanwhile, Megan bounced between MLM schemes and finding herself in expensive wellness retreats funded by, you guessed it, mom and dad. It all came to a head about 18 months ago when I got a call from my mom. She said, "Your father and I are in a bit of a financial bind. The mortgage payment is getting tricky. We didn't want to bother you, but Megan's been having health issues, and we've had to support her more than we expected." I didn't ask for proof. I didn't press for details. I just said, "Send me the account info for $1,600 a month." Every month. I set it to auto-pay from my account. It hurt. Not because of the money. I could afford it. Barely. But because they didn't even ask how I was doing. I just moved into a modest one-bedroom, still renting. No housewarming card. No visit. Just a steady drip of silence between payments. I told myself it was temporary. That I was doing the right thing. That maybe this would finally earn some respect. I was wrong. The first real crack came at Megan's birthday dinner, hosted at the house I was quietly paying for. When I arrived, Megan looked at me like I was a waiter who'd wandered into the wrong section. "Oh, you made it," she said, with a fake smile already halfway off her face. "There's beer in the garage fridge, I think." I brought a $200 digital frame preloaded with pictures from our childhood. A sentimental gift I thought might melt some ice. She never opened it. Then came Dad's toast. To Megan, he beamed. "You've always been the light in this family, the one who keeps us young and laughing. You're the reason this house is still a home." I nearly choked on my water. They hadn't even mentioned me. Not once. But it got worse. Over the next few months, I noticed a change in tone during the rare texts I got from Mom. Shorter. Colder. One-word responses. And Megan? She was suddenly playing homemaker, hosting brunches, redecorating the house, posting candid Instagram stories showing off the kitchen backsplash as if she owned the place. Then I heard from a family friend that Megan had moved in permanently, and that Mom had been telling people Megan was helping with the mortgage. I laughed at first. Then I just sat there, staring at the payment confirmation email on my screen. One afternoon, I decided to visit. No warning, Just a quick stop by on my way home from work. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the lawn had been professionally landscaped, something I knew my parents wouldn't splurge on. Then I saw the new welcome mat, the Moore family, established 2024. Moore was Megan's last name. I rang the bell. No answer. I rang again. Still nothing. But I could hear music inside, pop music, Megan's taste, not my parents'. I texted Mom, "Hey, I'm outside. Can we talk?" No response. That night, I got the message. From Mom, "We've blocked your number and changed the locks. You're no longer part of this family. No, please understand. No, this is hard for us." Just pure, detached finality. I stared at the text, read it twice, then a third time. Then I smiled. Not out of joy. Out of clarity. "Got it," I replied. "But you forgot one crucial thing." I opened my banking app. I canceled the auto payment. All $4,600 of it. 18 months of loyalty. 18 months of silence. 18 months of pretending I didn't notice the growing gap between what I gave and what I got back. 2 days later, I got a voicemail. "Jacob, this is Alan Peterson. I'm representing your parents regarding a pressing financial matter. We need to speak with you immediately. Please call back at your earliest convenience. It's urgent." I didn't call, because by then, I had already received the foreclosure notice. Not addressed to me, of course. It went straight to them, Mom, Dad, and Megan, via certified mail, hand-delivered to the same porch that had once been mine to walk up to without knocking. But I'd called the bank 2 days prior, explained that I was the one making the payments, not a co-signer, just a private party covering it voluntarily, and that I was no longer willing to continue. I didn't need to threaten anything. I simply revoked authorization, and the rest took care of itself. You'd be surprised how fast a house of cards collapses when no one's paying the mortgage. But let me rewind a bit, because the real unraveling didn't start with the foreclosure letter. It started with the panic that hit about 12 hours after that lawyer's voicemail. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to my email blowing up. First, it was Megan, then Mom, then even my dad, who hadn't spoken directly to me in months. Megan typed, "Why would you do this? What is wrong with you?" Mom typed, "Please, let's be civil. You're overreacting. We didn't mean anything by it." Dad typed, "We need to talk. This isn't how family handles things." That one made me laugh out loud. Because apparently, family handles things by changing locks, blocking numbers, and pretending someone doesn't exist until the bills stop being paid. Still, I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The next day, I checked Megan's Instagram. Her latest story had vanished. You know, the one with her posing in front of the house like it was some magazine spread. The #blessed, #moremansion caption had mysteriously disappeared too. I knew why. Because behind that front door, things were spiraling. The house wasn't in foreclosure yet, not officially. But the moment the payment was missed, and there was no Megan to cover it, no family teamwork to dig them out of the mess, I knew the clock had started ticking. I got confirmation from the bank a week later. The property had entered pre-foreclosure status. That meant notices, calls, red tape, stress, and suddenly, I was very important again. Mom tried calling me from a different number. When I didn't pick up, she left a voicemail that almost sounded like her old self, if you ignored the desperation under every word. "Jacob, honey, this has gone too far. We were angry, yes, but you have to understand, we didn't mean to hurt you. Megan has just been going through so much, and your father and I were trying to keep the peace. Please call me back. Please." I almost did. Not because I wanted to reconcile. No, that ship had sailed and sunk. But because I wanted to ask one question. What peace were you keeping? The kind that forgets who's feeding the roof over your head? The kind that rewrites the truth and sells it back to you in installments of guilt? The kind that expects your silence while they mock you from a home you're secretly paying for? No, I didn't call. Instead, I did something pettier. Or maybe something honest, depending on how you look at it. I sent Megan one final message. Short, surgical, clean. Turns out it wasn't your house after all. She left it on read. But not before she blocked me. I figured that was the end of it. But it wasn't. The real finale came a few days later when I received another voicemail from their lawyer. "Mr. Jacobs, the house is officially in pre-foreclosure. Unless the full past due amount is paid immediately, legal proceedings will continue. Your parents were under the impression this situation was resolved. Please call me back." They're extremely distressed. I bet they were. Because here's the thing. They'd taken for granted the one person in the family who never asked for anything. Not praise, not gifts, not public credit. Just decency. A place at the table. A little honesty. Instead, they handed my seat to Megan. Rolled out the red carpet for her, while quietly expecting me to pay for it all behind the curtain. They never imagined what would happen when I simply stepped off stage. And now? Now I hear they're trying to sell the house, scrambling for a buyer before the bank takes it entirely. But no one's biting. The local market's cold, and the story about their financial troubles is starting to float through the neighborhood like smoke. Funny how people ask questions when they see a once proud family suddenly stumble. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't have to. The silence said it all. But even now, even after all this, a part of me still aches. Not because I want them back in my life, but because I once did. I once believed that if I just worked harder, paid more, stayed quiet, they'd see me, respect me, treat me like more than a walking wallet with a shared bloodline. That illusion is gone now. And honestly, it's the most freeing thing I've ever lost. But the real chaos, oh, that's still coming. Because you wouldn't believe what they tried next. 2 days after that last voicemail, I was sitting in my apartment, quiet, warm, everything paid for by me and only me, when I heard a knock at my door. Not the mailman, not a neighbor, no delivery. It was my dad. I opened it just far enough to see his face and immediately regretted not checking the peephole first. He looked older, like stress had finally caught up with the arrogance. His eyes were bloodshot, his dress shirt was wrinkled in a way that didn't feel like style, and he didn't smile. Instead, he opened with, "Jacob, we need to talk." I stared at him. "No, you need to leave." He stepped forward like he expected me to cave. Like we'd just rewind to some simpler time where he barked orders and I followed out of habit. "I drove 2 hours to get here," he said. "That's not my problem," I replied, already shutting the door. His hand caught it before it closed fully. "Don't do this. You're better than this." And that's when I snapped. I pushed the door open just wide enough to look him dead in the eye. "You changed the locks. You blocked my number. You told me I wasn't part of the family. And now that the gravy train's off the tracks, you remember where I live." He looked taken aback, like he expected tears or pleading, not steel. "That was your mother," he muttered, trying to shift blame like a shell game. I scoffed. "She hit send. But you both signed the papers. You watched Megan move in. You watched her pretend like she built that house with her bare hands while I was footing the bill. And you didn't say a word." He stepped back slightly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, it got out of hand. But you know how your sister is. We were just trying to support her." "No," I said firmly. "You were enabling her. There's a difference." He tried one more card. "The oldest one in the book. She's family." I stared at him in disbelief. "And I'm not." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I shut the door in his face. This time, he didn't stop it. I stood there for a long time, hand on the doorknob, heart thudding. Because as much as I hated it, part of me still wanted him to knock again. To apologize. To say he messed up, really meant it. Maybe even say the words I'd never heard growing up. "I'm proud of you." But all I heard were footsteps retreating down the hall. That night, Megan tried again. She called from a friend's number. This time, she wasn't angry. She was pathetic. "Jake, I know we've had our issues, but we're in a serious bind. Mom and Dad are not doing well. The house is going to be taken if we don't get help. Can't you just spot us a couple months until we figure something out?" "Figure something out?" I repeated. "You mean like a job?" Dead silence. Then, "You're being cruel." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was the most backward, twisted accusation I'd ever heard. "I paid your rent for a year and a half. Without a thank you. You humiliated me at your birthday dinner. You all cut me out and made me feel like a stranger in my own family. And now that the money's gone, I'm cruel?" "You don't understand," she said, voice rising. "No," I interrupted, voice calm but ice cold. "You don't understand. Actions have consequences. And just because you never had to face them before doesn't mean I'm going to keep shielding you." I hung up, blocked the number, and that was when the campaign started. They didn't stop. Not even close. Aunt Marie messaged me on Facebook, pretending to check in before slipping in. "Your mom's heart's been acting up again. All this stress isn't helping." Uncle Ron sent me an email asking if I'd consider being the bigger man. Even my godmother, who I hadn't seen since high school, texted to say how disappointed she was in me. That's when I realized they were doing it. They were playing the martyr card. The "we did our best but Jacob turned on us" act. Classic. Except this time, I didn't stay quiet. I drafted one post. Just one. I didn't tag anyone. Didn't name names. Just facts. For the past 18 months, I paid someone else's $4,600 mortgage. I was never asked if I could afford it, never thanked. Then I was cut off, blocked, and locked out of a house I'd been silently keeping afloat. Now that the bank is involved, I'm suddenly important again. Not because I matter, but because the money does. I won't name names. But I won't be guilted into silence either. I logged off after that. I didn't check the reactions. Didn't scroll the comments. But the messages stopped. I think, deep down, they knew it was over. That I'd stepped out of the role they'd written for me and wasn't looking back. But then something happened that I wasn't expecting. Something that pulled the rug out from under this whole thing. Because 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was from my mom. The envelope was cream-colored, creased at the corners, with a familiar looping script that I hadn't seen in years, not on anything personal, anyway. It smelled faintly like lavender. My mom had always sprayed letters with perfume, even holiday cards. I held it in my hands longer than I probably should have, debating whether to rip it up or read it. Curiosity won. Inside was a single piece of lined paper, neatly folded in thirds. Jacob, I know we've hurt you. I know the things we said, what I said can't be unsaid. But I am asking you to at least try to understand where I was coming from. Megan needed us. She still does. And maybe I got so focused on keeping her above water that I didn't realize I was letting you drown in silence. You never asked for help, and I took that to mean you didn't need anything. I see now how wrong I was. I didn't know about the payments. Not all of them. Your father handled the finances. But I knew enough to know we were being carried, and I let it happen. I let you carry us, and I didn't say thank you. I didn't say I love you. I didn't say I'm proud of you. I am so proud of you, Jacob. I always have been. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to say it out loud. I was too busy worrying about everything else, and I see now what that cost. The house, well, you probably know it's gone. We're staying with your sister's friend for now, but it's not permanent. Nothing is. If you never want to see us again, I understand. But I hope one day, maybe, we'll sit at a table again. Even just once. No demands. No expectations. Just family. Love, Mom. I reread the letter 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I needed to figure out if it was real. It felt honest. Regretful. But it came after everything. After the lies, the betrayal, the smirks and locked doors and lawyer voicemails. After the whole family had turned me into a villain for finally saying no. And now that they'd lost it all, the truth was just convenient. But I didn't feel angry anymore. Not even cold. Just done. For the first time in years, my shoulders didn't feel like they were holding up an entire household. My phone wasn't blowing up. No payment reminders. No desperate spot me just this once texts. The silence wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. And I didn't want to give that peace up. Not even for an apology. 3 weeks later, the house hit the auction listing. I saw the photos online. Every corner looked emptier than I remembered. Not physically, there was still furniture and decor, but emotionally. It was like the illusion had cracked, and the house finally reflected the truth. It had never been a home. Just a stage set, propped up by sacrifice and denial. I got a message from an old neighbor, Mrs. Fields. She was the kind of woman who knew everything going on within a 5-block radius. She told me my parents had been forced to vacate within 14 days. Megan hadn't taken it well. There had been shouting. Police weren't called, but it was close. No surprise there. A week after that, I got another email, this time from the bank's lawyer. Apparently, I was still listed in some documentation as a concerned third party, and they wanted to know if I had any intention of bidding on the property. I didn't reply. I let the house go. And for the first time in a long, long while, I let myself go. I started spending money on myself. Not extravagantly, but meaningfully. I upgraded my apartment, took a solo trip to the mountains and left my phone on airplane mode the entire time. Bought a used car that wasn't held together by prayers and duct tape. Signed up for therapy and actually went. I stopped checking Megan's Instagram. Blocked the family group chat for good measure. Changed my number. Deleted the saved payment accounts. One day, while walking through a bookstore, I picked up a blank journal. I didn't know what I'd write in it, but I felt like something needed to start. Not to process the pain, therapy was already doing that, but to record who I was becoming, now that I wasn't stuck in the role they'd assigned me. The reliable one. The bank account. The invisible son. That guy was gone. Months passed. I didn't see them. Didn't hear from them. Christmas came. No card. No message. And for once, that felt like a gift. On New Year's Eve, I sat alone in my new apartment, sipping tea and watching fireworks from the balcony. I thought about all the years I spent trying to earn love by being useful, about how easily they discarded me the second I stopped serving a purpose. But more than anything, I thought about how close I'd come to believing they were right. And I was proud of myself for walking away, for burning the bridge they swore was my only path, for surviving, and then building something better. One morning, early spring, I got an email from an unfamiliar name. No subject line, just one sentence. I understand now. I'm sorry. I didn't need to ask who it was from. I didn't reply. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't a dramatic confrontation. It's living a life so free, so full, so authentically yours, that the people who broke you are left to wonder how you did it without them. And the truth is, I just stopped waiting for them to care and started choosing me. Every single day. My name's Ryan, I'm 27, and last week my parents sat me down at the kitchen table and casually told me they'd reallocated the $250,000 I'd spent the last 9 years saving for a house. My dad even laughed, actually laughed, when he said, "Thanks for funding your brother's future." And in that moment, I just smiled. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. Because the truth is, they had no idea they'd just stepped right into the trap I'd been setting for months. But before I get ahead of myself, let me back up. I grew up the middle child of 3. My older brother, Evan, has always been the golden boy. Captain of the football team in high school, straight into a good college, paid for by my parents, first to get married, first to have kids. My younger sister, Chloe, was the baby of the family, the one who could do no wrong. And me? I was the quiet one, the one who worked part-time jobs, kept to myself, and didn't really cause trouble. I think my parents got used to the idea that I was fine and didn't need much. After college, I got a decent job in IT and moved back into my old room for a while. It wasn't glamorous, but it let me save aggressively. Every paycheck, I put away half. Nights and weekends, I freelanced fixing computers and designing websites. Birthdays, bonuses, even tax refunds, I saved them all. Over 9 years, I built up a nest egg big enough to buy a modest house outright in my area. And here's where things start getting complicated. Evan, the golden boy, had been living a very different life. He and his wife were constantly investing in new ideas, a failed restaurant, a doomed real estate flip, a subscription box startup that never made it past launch. Each time, my parents bailed him out. They'd dip into their savings, take out small loans, even co-sign on credit cards. And every time they'd say the same thing: "He just needs a break." I bit my tongue through all of it. I figured, fine, it's their money, their choice. But about a year ago, things came to a head. Evan announced he was going to open a boutique gym with a wellness cafe attached. He pitched it like he was presenting to Shark Tank, complete with slides. And at the end of his little presentation, he looked right at me and said, "You could be our tech guy. You know, invest some of that money you've been hoarding." I told him no, flat out. I wasn't going to throw my life savings into another one of his half-baked ventures. He sulked for weeks after that, telling everyone I was selfish and not a team player. My parents didn't say anything at first, but I could tell they agreed with him. Then, a few months ago, my mom started dropping hints. Little comments over dinner like, "You're young, you'll make it back," or "Family should help each other out." At first, I ignored it. But then it turned into longer conversations where she'd tell me how stressed Evan was, how much this business meant to him, how this could finally be the thing that works. I kept saying no. And then, 3 weeks ago, I logged into my bank account and felt my stomach drop. The money was gone. Every last cent of the $250,000 I had saved was transferred out. My heart was pounding as I scrolled through the transaction history, and that's when I saw it. A single transfer to an account I didn't recognize. I confronted my parents that night. They didn't even look guilty. My mom just crossed her arms and said, "It's done, Ryan." We had to make an executive decision for the good of the family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My dad leaned back in his chair, smirking, and said the line that's been ringing in my ears ever since. "Thanks for funding your brother's future." I felt like the air got sucked out of the room. My hands were shaking. I wanted to scream, to demand they give it back, to threaten to call the police. But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I sat down, took a slow breath, and smiled. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I'd been preparing for something like this. For months, I'd been quietly documenting every conversation, every text message where they pressured me to help the family. I'd moved most of my actual savings to a separate account under an LLC I'd set up. The account they drained? It was bait. But I didn't tell them that. Not yet. Instead, I let them talk. I let them explain how Evan was going to pay me back double once the gym took off. I nodded along, even congratulated them for finally doing something bold. My dad looked smug, my mom relieved. They thought I'd accepted it. That night, I went back to my room and sat in the dark for hours, just staring at the ceiling. Part of me wanted to cry. Another part of me wanted to burn the whole house down. But mostly, I felt something else, a cold, calm determination. I knew exactly what I was going to do next. And that's where things started to get interesting. The next morning, I woke up before everyone else and just sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the backyard. My parents thought they had just solved their problem child. Evan thought he had secured his golden ticket. I knew better. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of birds. It was the perfect kind of silence for thinking. I kept replaying last night's conversation in my head. The way my dad's mouth curled into a smirk. The way my mom said, executive decision, like she was running a company, not steamrolling her own son. The way Evan wasn't even there, probably out celebrating with his wife. I let myself feel angry this time. Really angry. My hands gripped the coffee mug so tightly my knuckles turned white. By noon, I had calmed down enough to act like everything was normal. That was the first rule I set for myself. Stay calm, stay quiet, stay patient. I couldn't let them know I was planning anything. If I blew up now, they might try to undo the transfer, might sense that I wasn't as powerless as they thought. That evening, I joined everyone in the living room like nothing happened. Mom was watching TV, Dad was reading the paper, and I just sat down on the couch and asked casually, "So when's the big grand opening?" Mom lit up immediately, happy that I was coming around. She started telling me about Evan's plans, how they'd found a perfect building to lease, how they were already ordering equipment. I nodded along, even asked questions, playing the part of the supportive brother. Inside, I was memorizing every detail. A few days later, Evan came by the house, grinning like he had just won the lottery. "Dude, you won't regret this," he said, slapping me on the shoulder. "This gym is going to be massive. You'll thank me when you're sipping smoothies in the VIP lounge." "Yeah," I said with a little smile. "I'm sure I will." What he didn't notice was the small flash drive in my pocket. Earlier that morning, I had backed up every single message thread, every bank statement, every email that showed where the money had gone. I had copies in the cloud, copies on an encrypted drive, and one set locked in a safe deposit box under my name. If things got messy, I was going to be ready. At night, when everyone was asleep, I sat at my laptop building out the next phase of my plan. Step 1 was making sure they couldn't claim ignorance later. I drafted an email to my parents and Evan, laying out in polite, formal language that I understood my contribution to the gym project was involuntary, but that I expected transparent financial reporting as a silent investor. I even signed it with my LLC name to make it look more official. Mom replied the next morning with a single line, "Of course, honey. We'll keep you updated." Perfect. That was exactly what I needed. Written confirmation that they knew what they had done. For the next few weeks, I kept my head down and acted like nothing was wrong. I went to work, kept saving my real money, and on weekends, I even stopped by the gym location under the guise of checking on my investment. Evan loved showing me around. He'd gesture at the half-painted walls and the rows of unopened equipment and talk about how they were making history. But the cracks were already starting to show. One afternoon, I overheard Evan and his wife arguing in the parking lot. She was worried about the budget, about how much debt they were racking up, about the fact that membership pre-sales were lower than expected. Evan brushed it off, saying, "Ryan will cover us if we go over. He owes me." I stood there behind a column, listening, my jaw tight. That sentence, "he owes me," lit something in my chest. It was one thing for my parents to think of my savings as a family resource, but hearing my brother say I owed him after everything I'd done to stay independent, that was the moment I knew there was no going back. That night, I didn't just plan. I started pulling strings. I reached out to a friend of mine from college, Derek, who happened to work in commercial real estate. I asked him to quietly look into the lease agreement Evan had signed. A few days later, he called me back with some very interesting information. The lease was under my parents' names as guarantors, not Evan's. Meaning if the gym defaulted, my parents would be the ones financially responsible. That little detail gave me leverage I hadn't even realized I had. Over the next week, I started collecting everything I might need for the moment I decided to strike. Copies of receipts, pictures of the unfinished gym, voice memos of conversations where Evan bragged about how he secured my money. Each piece felt like adding a brick to the foundation of something big, something inevitable. Meanwhile, my parents kept acting like nothing was wrong. They'd ask me if I was excited, if I wanted to come to the soft launch, if I wanted to invite friends. I'd just smile and say, yeah, maybe. Inside, the pressure was building. The night before the soft opening, Evan invited the whole family to the gym for a special preview. I stood in the middle of the half-finished space, looking at the shiny new equipment, the expensive lighting fixtures, the logo stenciled on the wall. Everyone was laughing, drinking champagne, talking about how this was the start of a new era. I just stood there quietly, holding my glass, feeling this strange mix of satisfaction and anticipation. Because tomorrow was the day everything started. The morning of the soft opening, I woke up earlier than usual and just sat on the edge of my bed staring at my phone. Weeks of patience, fake smiles, and silent planning had brought me here. My parents thought today was going to be a celebration. Evan thought it was the first day of the rest of his life. None of them realized that today was the day I started turning the screws. I put on a casual button-down and jeans, just enough to look like I cared, and drove over to the gym. The parking lot was already busy with early guests, friends, and family taking pictures outside the front door. Inside, Evan was in full showman mode, shaking hands and giving little speeches about how this was just the beginning. I kept my hands in my pockets, quiet and observant. I walked around, taking mental notes of everything I saw. The piles of unused boxes in the storage room, the unfinished flooring in the back hallway, the staff-only area where I knew Evan was keeping equipment receipts and membership forms. At one point, Mom pulled me aside. "Doesn't it feel good to see what your money is building?" she said, smiling at me like this was some touching family moment. I met her eyes and smiled back, not the fake smile I'd been practicing, but something sharper. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice even. "It feels really good to see exactly where every dollar went." If she noticed the edge in my tone, she didn't say anything. Evan called everyone together near the front desk and started making a little speech about the dream finally coming true. People clapped, raised their champagne glasses, and someone started playing upbeat music from a Bluetooth speaker. It was the perfect distraction for me to slip away unnoticed into the office. I closed the door behind me and exhaled slowly. My heart was beating hard, but my hands were steady as I pulled the flash drive from my pocket and slid it into the computer. Within minutes, I had copied every file I needed: the membership contracts, the vendor invoices, the payment schedules. All the evidence I would need to prove how much of my money had actually been spent and how much debt they had quietly taken on. Before I left, I took a picture of the whiteboard in the corner. Scrawled in big letters was a list of overdue bills and a note: "Need more cash by 15th. That photo would come in handy later. When I stepped back out into the main area, no one had noticed I was gone. Evan was leading a tour of the weight room, bragging about the imported equipment. I just rejoined the group, nodding along as if nothing had happened. That night, I sent a polite but formal email to Evan and my parents. "Thank you for the preview today. As your silent investor, I'd like to request a full copy of the business plan, a monthly financial report, and a signed acknowledgement of my ownership percentage in the venture. Please provide this by the end of the week." It wasn't a demand, not yet. It was a test, a way to see how they would respond. The reply came faster than I expected. Evan sent a short, annoyed message. "Ryan, this isn't Shark Tank. You don't get to make demands just because you put money in. Chill out." My mom followed up with a longer, more measured response, trying to smooth things over. "Sweetheart, we know you're nervous, but this is family. You have to trust us. We'll keep you updated, but we don't need to turn this into something formal. Evan needs room to make decisions without feeling watched." I read the email twice, then closed my laptop and sat back in my chair. They still didn't get it. They still thought this was just about money, that I would grumble, then back down. But I wasn't backing down. Over the next few days, I stayed quiet and started putting the second part of my plan into motion. I scheduled a private meeting with Derek, my real estate friend, and went over the lease agreement in detail. Then I talked to another friend of mine, Melissa, who worked in accounting, and asked her to take a look at the invoices I'd copied from Evan's computer. What she found made me almost laugh out loud. A lot of the equipment wasn't paid for in full. It was leased with staggered payments. And if the business defaulted on those payments, the supplier could repossess everything within 30 days. Even better, the first major payment was coming due in less than 3 weeks. In other words, Evan's dream gym was sitting on a very fragile foundation. I spent the next week gathering more information, quietly but relentlessly. I pulled up county records to check the property details, learned which contractors were still owed money, and even visited the small business association in town to talk, hypothetically, of course, about investor rights in situations where funds had been used without consent. Every step made me calmer, more focused. By the second weekend, my parents invited me over for dinner. I showed up, sat at the table, and listened to them talk about how successful the opening had been, how Evan was already signing up more members than expected. I kept my face neutral, nodding, even smiling. Then my dad leaned back in his chair and said, "See, we told you this was a good idea. You were worried for nothing." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment I almost felt sorry. Almost. Because I knew something he didn't. By this time next month, the entire game would change, and they wouldn't be the ones holding the cards. 2 weeks later, I got the call I had been waiting for. Evan's voice on the other end of the line was sharp and irritated, not the usual cocky confidence he used when talking about his business. "Ryan," he said without even saying hello, "we need more money. The flooring contractor is threatening to walk, and we've got a big payment due for the equipment lease. If we don't get ahead of it, we're going to miss the deadline." I didn't say anything for a second. I just let the silence stretch. "Ryan," he said again, his voice a little more urgent. "Finally," I said, "send me the financial reports I asked for first. Then we'll talk." There was a pause on the line. "This isn't the time to play hardball," he snapped. "This is family. You either step up or we all go down together." And that was it. That was the moment I had been waiting for. "I'll send you my decision in writing," I said evenly, then hung up. That night, I drafted the email that would light the match. "Dear Evan and Mom and Dad, as requested, I am following up on my previous communication. Since I have not received any formal documentation or acknowledgement of my ownership in the gym, and given that the funds were taken from me without my consent, I am officially demanding full repayment of the $250,000 within 14 days. If repayment is not made, I will proceed with legal action to recover the funds, including but not limited to filing a police report for unauthorized transfer, contacting the bank's fraud department, and pursuing civil action for misappropriation of funds. Please note that I have already documented and preserved all relevant evidence, including bank transfers, text messages, and email conversations, as well as photos of the gym and its current financial liabilities. I will also be notifying your equipment supplier, landlord, and contractors of the disputed funds and my lack of consent as an investor. I am happy to settle this privately, but only if repayment is made in full by the stated deadline. Regards, Ryan." I sent it to all three of them, CC'd my LLC email address, and sat back in my chair feeling the calmest I had in weeks. The fallout was almost immediate. My mom called first, panicked. "Ryan, what are you doing? You can't just threaten your own family like this." "You took my money without asking," I said flatly. "This is me asking for it back, nicely. Your father and I just wanted to help Evan get a leg up," she pleaded. "He has a family to support." "So do I," I cut her off. "And you made that choice for me without even asking. Now I'm making mine." She started crying, which was hard to hear, but I didn't back down. "I'm giving you 2 weeks," I repeated. "After that, this goes legal." 2 days later, I got a furious call from Evan. "You're insane," he shouted. "You're going to ruin everything. If you do this, the gym will go under. Mom and Dad will be on the hook for the lease, and we'll all be in trouble." "That's not my problem," I said calmly. "You should have thought about that before you used stolen money to fund your dream." "It wasn't stolen," he yelled. "Was it your account?" I asked. "Did you have permission?" The silence on the other end was answer enough. After that, Things escalated quickly. My dad stormed into my room one night, his face red. "You're tearing this family apart," he growled. "No," I said quietly. "You did that when you decided my savings were a family slush fund." The next few days were tense. I could feel the shift every time I walked into the house. The glares, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room. I didn't rise to any of it. I just waited. Day 10 of the deadline. I got an email from the gym's equipment supplier confirming that they had received notice of a potential financial dispute and were monitoring the situation. Day 12. The flooring contractor called me directly, asking if I knew when payment would come through because they were ready to file a lien. I politely told them to contact my parents, as they were the lease guarantors. By day 14, I hadn't received a cent from anyone. So, just as I promised, I filed a fraud report with the bank and provided copies of every piece of evidence I had. I contacted a lawyer and sent a letter of intent to sue. And I CC'd Evan, my parents, and, at my lawyer's suggestion, the landlord and major suppliers. That's when the real implosion began. Evan called me in a panic. "You've doomed us," he said, his voice shaking. "The landlord just called. If we miss another payment, they're terminating the lease. We've already sunk too much into this place to back out now." "Then pay me back," I said simply. "We don't have the money," he snapped. "That sounds like a you problem," I said, then hung up. 2 days later, the gym was closed temporarily. Within a week, the equipment supplier came in and repossessed half the machines. The flooring contractor filed a lien, and the landlord locked the doors for non-payment. And my parents? They were suddenly very quiet around me. One night, Dad finally knocked on my door. He didn't look angry this time, just tired. "We can't pay you back," he admitted. We lost most of it already." "I know," I said, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. "That's why I'm giving you this." He frowned, picking it up. It was a notarized agreement. They would sign over their share of the family vacation property, a cabin they had always promised to pass down to us kids, to me exclusively, in lieu of repayment. If they didn't sign, I would proceed with the lawsuit. For a long moment, Dad just stared at the paper. Then he signed it. When the ink was dry, I stood up and looked him in the eye. "You taught me a lot," I said quietly. "Mostly what not to do." The next weekend, I drove out to the cabin alone. The lake was calm, the air cool and quiet. I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee, looking out over the water, feeling something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Evan's gym never reopened. My parents eventually had to sell their house to cover the debts from the lease. We barely speak now, and when we do, it's polite, surface-level conversation, nothing deeper. But every time I unlock the cabin door and step inside, I think about that night at the kitchen table, about my dad's smug little laugh, about the way they all thought I would just roll over and take it. And I smile. Because in the end, I didn't just get my money back. I got my freedom. If you've enjoyed this story, let me know your thoughts in the comments below.